going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Liam Picks Fights presents Bets and Banter. And today on the show, we're going over UFC Vegas 98. And if you guys have been around the show for a long time, then you know exactly what time it is. It's Tatsuro Taira's time. We've been talking about this guy since he got to the UFC, and a lot of people doubted. A lot of people gave us grief along the way, but we've been cashing all along the way, guys. Tatsuro Taira, from the very first time he stepped in this UFC octagon, we were there, and we had the 10-unit play against Carlos Candelario. We had multiple 10-unit shots on Tatsuro Taira, and those prices disappeared for a long time, guys. So now we're back in a position where Tatsuro Taira's in a challenging fight. He's in an interesting fight, and I'm very excited to talk about it with you all today. If you guys are new to Bets and Banter, welcome aboard. First and foremost, my name is Liam. I pick fights on this channel each and every week. Oftentimes, guys, I do a first look early on in the week. If you guys missed it, I did a show with Die Hard MMA. I did Wager Wars this week. I've been all over the place doing content on other people's channels. Many of those things, I did a show with my guy VB as well. They ended up on my channel, so I have been posting content throughout the week, but I've been saying yes to everybody. I've been spreading myself a little bit thin. So what I wanted to do is come to you guys fully prepared for Bets and Banter like we always do at the end of the week. So that's where I am right now in terms of my level of preparation is the highest it's been all week. I'm very excited to talk about this contest with all of you guys. And we're going to start at the beginning of the card and work our way on up. Shout out to Harry, says the volume is incredible. We've been having audio issues the last couple of shows, and it started when I exited a StreamYard link mid-show. I think that we've gotten the audio back in check, but guys, if there's any problems with the audio throughout the show, please go ahead and let me know in the comments section, and I will definitely address that. Also, I wanted to shout out, we've had 3 people sign up for channel memberships, and I appreciate each and every one of you guys. We have 4,000 people now subscribed to the channel. That was a big thing for me, and I appreciate everybody who's helped us get there. All the people who've been rocking with us for years, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. And all the people who are recent acolytes, people who have just signed up, people who have just gotten on board with the channel, I really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your week to spend some time with me and talk these fights. Now, without further ado, let's get into the action like we always do, starting with the first fight of the night. So my guy Lenny says that it sounds kind of lower. I hope that the audio corrects throughout the course of the evening. We're going to go ahead with, let's see this. Automatically adjust mic volume. Hopefully this works. Hopefully this is a better listening experience, but if it's not, then let me know, Lenny. I appreciate the commentary nonetheless. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at this fight card. We're starting with a flyweight fight and ending with a flyweight fight. So we've got bookend flyweight action on this card. And first and foremost, guys, we've got Clayton Carpenter returning to the octagon. He's an MMA Lab product, and he's been out of the octagon for a little while now. He made a debut. It was successful against Juan Camilo Ronderos. And if you look at Juan Camilo Ronderos, he actually just got a win tonight, got a third-round TKO in his first fight since getting cut from the UFC. So shout out to Juan Camilo Ronderos going out there and getting back on track. If you look at that fight with Clayton Carpenter, Clayton got taken down. It's not like he didn't face some adversity. He got taken down almost immediately. He was getting hit with some clean shots. And he showed off his jiu-jitsu prowess, right? Off of his back, Clayton Carpenter showed an ability to get sweeps, an ability to wrestle back up to his feet. I think he's a difficult guy to try and take down and hold down. When I look at the Clayton Carpenter side, what is his upside? What is his best skill set? He's pretty dangerous with his ground game. If you look at how he implements it, I think that sometimes he struggles to get his wrestling game going. When you watch him against higher level competition, I think Edgar Chairez, for example, he struggled a little bit in the wrestling in that fight. When he was able to get on top, especially when Chairez fatigued late in the fight, he was able to advance positions. He was able to look pretty clean in some of those exchanges. However, I think we have seen a guy like Clayton Carpenter is pretty inexperienced, right? He didn't have a lot of pro experience when he got to the UFC. Granted, he's been, competing in martial arts since he was a kid. But what I mean by that is at the highest level against a lot of resistance. Edgar Chairez has some known deficiencies, right? He's very dangerous. He's very powerful. He's potent. He comes out strong, but he does slow down. It's been a known problem for him throughout his career. And I think that when you look at Clayton Carpenter, he struggled really badly in the first round of that fight when Edgar Chairez was fresh, when he was feeling good. And then in round 2 and 3, when Chairez started to fall off a cliff, Clayton Carpenter picked up the pack and he took over the fight. But if you guys go back and watch it, Clayton Carpenter's eye was nearly swollen shut, and he faced a lot of adversity in the first round there. So I rate Edgar Chairez as a tough out, as a guy who's willing to go out there and put on a scrap, but I do think he's got known liabilities, and there was a reason that he lost that fight, which was his own cardio. I don't think it was his lack of skills. So when I look at this kind of fight, I say to myself, okay, you got the bigger guy in Clayton Carpenter, and I think he is the guy who's probably going to win the first round. If I had to make a criticism of his opponent, Lucas Rocha, I think Lucas Rocha is a little bit willy-nilly in the first round, right? He comes out, he's very happy, he's very smiley, he's ready to go fight, right? He's a happy-go-lucky guy, 24 years of age, and the thing that I love about him is that attitude doesn't change. He could be taken down, controlled, rode out on the ground. Somebody's trying to choke him, take his back, take his neck home with them. And the guy just stays poised, stays patient. And when he's able to get back out, he goes right back on offense. And I think that when you look at him in between rounds after his Contender Series fight, a lot of people that are box score UFC stats bettors, I think will look at his stats and say, this guy is no good. And I think that when you look at the actual tape, he's a lot better than people have necessarily given him credit for. So here's the way I look at it. He's got a lot of professional experience for a 24-year-old, right? I think that he's fought pretty solid opposition. If you look at the guy that he fought in the LFA, I'm drawing a blank on the gentleman's name, but what I could tell you is he's a brown belt out of shoot the box, and he's not a bad fighter. He went out there, he tried to implement a very heavy wrestling and grappling game plan, and he fatigued himself. And that is exactly what happened if you guys watch back when Lucas Rocha was taking on Davi Bittencourt on Contender Series. Now, there was some weird circumstances there. They were supposed to fight, right? Then there was a break in, Lucas Rocha misses weight, so they schedule it to go a week later instead of at 125, at 135. And then Lucas Rocha, who's the undersized fighter in theory, he goes out there and ends up getting in some really dicey positions, some dicey situations. I think of a guy like Lucas Rocha as a guy who showed, number one, he's small, but he can respond to adversity well. So I think he's going to get put in some awkward positions in this fight. I think the optimal way to bet him would probably be to try and enter after round one. We saw last time out with Clayton Carpenter, he has a lot of piss and vinegar in the first round, right? He got taken down. He looked like he was in some bad positions. He scrambled back up to his feet. But we also have to acknowledge Juan Camilo Ronderos had very little experience. He was 4-2 as a professional. I think tonight he became 5-2. I'd have to go back and look. But in any case, very few professional fights. On the other side, this kid's had a ton of professional fights. He went out there in the LFA where he's in there with a tough guy, a guy who's really trying to grab a hold of him, wear him down in the wrestling and grappling, a shoot-the-box guy who knows what he's doing. He's got a brown belt, and the guy gassed himself out trying to out-grapple him, and then in rounds 2 and 3, he started to make him pay, and he continues to pressure. So I think that knee against Davi Bittencourt, if he hadn't have landed that knee and finished the fight, I think he would have taken over in rounds 2 and 3. I thought that was the trend that we were seeing. I thought Davi Bittencourt had spent the majority of his energy already, and I thought that you were seeing a guy go out there and continue to impose his will and his skill set. So for me, the optimal entry here may be after round 1. If Almeida gets ridden like a donkey, right? He's getting in all these bad positions. Clayton Carpenter's been out of the cage for a while. He hasn't been supremely active. And for me, that's a big cardio concern if you want to go out there and implement a wrestling heavy game plan. Carpenter on the feet, I think, could be competitive, but he doesn't throw in as much combination. He won't fill the volume as much, and in my opinion, he's very hittable. I think that we saw that against Chairez, and he can take a lot of damage on the feet. He got rocked, he got wobbled, he then started to wrestle out of necessity. So I want to shout out our guy Harry P. Ness for the donation in the chat. $1 dono from our guy Harry, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you very much. I think that Real Fight Picks in the chat says Rocha by KO. I'll just tell you, the odds makers, we're very low on Rocha KO here, meaning they opened this up at like plus 390, and we're talking about a flyweight fight. We're talking about, a guy who's obviously coming off a knockout win. He's got 10 wins via knockout, and he's 24 years of age. That is a pretty impressive record, and you could say, hey, some of these guys were maybe not up to snuff on the Brazilian regional scene. He's a little bit small, so again, there's some room for debate here. I understand why sharp guys came in on the Carpenter side when this line came down to minus 130 or so. However, you're now looking at a price where you're basically saying, this guy's sub 35% of the time, and I think his cardio looks solid. I think his work rate looks solid, and I think his submission defense looked pretty solid. So Could he get tapped out in the first round? Yeah, I mean, Clayton Carpenter is aggressive. He comes out, he puts on the heavy pressure, but I just don't know if I could trust this guy to implement this style over time. And for me, the real concern on the Carpenter side is that I don't know what he's been up to in the interim. I believe he's been dealing with injuries, and I think that he has some skill, but I don't know how he's going to respond in this kind of fight that I think is going to be extremely high paced. I just think if he doesn't finish Rocha's the kind of guy that keeps going all night. He reminds me, of these fighters that's like an Energizer bunny. So maybe you could put him in some bad spots, but if you can't finish him, he's going to stick around and try and get you out of there late. If not, turn up the pressure on you late and make a statement, get the judges back on his side in the later rounds. So that's not the kind of thing that you want to price as a favorite, right? A guy who's going to go out there, maybe give up his back, lose the first round. I do think that's dicey. But in terms of who do I think could win the fight, I think both these guys have an honest chance. I think Carpenter should be a slight favorite. I think the line is a little bit too wide. So with that being said, guys, we are going to quickly refer to the Tapology page just so you guys have a little bit more context beyond just my analysis. I can tell you guys what I think, but what I can't do is tell you how the fight's going to go. What we can do is look at some of these measurables, 24 years of age compared to 28 years of age. So I would say, if anything, a slight advantage in the anthropomorphics to Clayton Carpenter. He's also the taller fighter. He's got a 2-inch reach advantage here, but for a guy as small as Rocha, a guy who's typically coming in a little bit undersized in his fights, this is not the biggest size disparity he could face in this division, not by a long shot. I think he was booked to fight Jose Johnson at one point. Way bigger guy, way longer guy. So I think that the Clayton Carpenter matchup is in some ways a little bit more forgiving in that regard. And Clayton's a talented kid, but I just think you've got a guy with 18 pro fights, 24 years of age, never lets that smile leave his face. Unless he gets finished in the first round, I think he's going to make this a more honest fight than most people expect. And with that being said, guys, let's move along to the next fight on the card. We've got Dan Argueta taking on Cody Haddon. And this is a fun fight because I really like and respect both these guys. If you guys have been watching the Dana White Contender Series breakdowns that I do with my guy Gordo, with my guy Pearce, we talked about Cody Haddon earlier this season. What did we say about him? Well, let's go ahead and pull up our navigation document. We've got it right here. So let's see what we've got for Cody Haddon. Now, Cody Haddon, he fought on Dana White Contender Series. What week is this? Week number 2, is that correct? Week 2. Nice. Okay, so here's where we go. I talked about Haddon being one of the better prospects on the Dana White Contender Series this season. Oh, God, we got a Tapology ad just blaring here. Sorry about that, folks. When I look at this fight, right, I have a guy in Cody Haddon who I really respect, and when he was fighting Billy Brand, we called the club and sub. We were very happy about that, very proud of that. If we look back, we'll share this tab for a second. And ultimately, the lean is towards Haddon. Think he's too big, too athletic. Opponent is a bit too easy to hurt and too easy to take down. Brand is dog tough, but limited skill at this point in his career. Haddon, club, and sub. That was the way that we saw this going down. And now you've got Haddon taking on a guy in Dan Argueta who is a talented fighter, but a guy who the game plan has kind of been written on how to beat Dan Argueta. Like, there is a way that you could beat him, which is, number one, you have to make him work really hard in the wrestling and grappling phase. If he's able to establish his office on top, we've seen against Myron Santos, he'll ride out the position, he'll keep throwing ground and pound, he'll feel very comfortable in that kind of fight. But if you make him work, if you make him get up, if you make him do these, explosive movements throughout the fight, like we saw against John Matsumoto, then he has a much harder time. We also saw he can kind of be neutralized in some fights where his wrestling isn't as potent, where he's not able to get that system-based wrestling going. We saw the Miles Johns fight. Miles Johns, he tested positive, but we did see, he really struggled to out-wrestle, out-grapple, out-maneuver, or out-strike Miles Johns. And I don't think Miles Johns is a bad fighter, but I do think if you want to have a real long-term UFC career where you're advancing up the food chain, that's the kind of guy that I do think you need to be able to beat when your style is wrestling, grappling forward, come forward, throwing shots. He really just didn't offer very much in that fight, and I think Miles Johns just showed himself to be a better version, of a similar fighter. And when I look at Dan Argueta, I think that Dan Argueta is a guy that I respect. He's a guy that I look at as talented, but I do think that he's just got a clearer ceiling than a guy like Cody Haddon. I do think Cody Haddon can go further in the sport. I think he's been putting together a solid, well-rounded mixed martial arts game. I think that he showed that in his last fight. But one thing we always note is when guys come into these fights and they're off of a Contender Series performance where they look great and they go out there and get a big win, a big finish, sometimes they do get overpriced, right? Sometimes they do get put in these spots where, they're a little bit overvalued. Could I see a world in which he gets out-wrestled? I could see that world. Dan Argueta is a U.S.-based wrestler and grappler, and oftentimes I talk about there's a very high average quality in a lot of these wrestling, grappling situations that you find yourself in as long as you're in a major metro area, a place that has a good MMA team, these kind of things. I will answer a couple quick questions from the chat. Henry says, where is Just Win? We live in different time zones, right? So there's just not been an opportunity for us to record the show together, right? So that's where we're at right now. There may be a time in the future where our schedules align to record together, but I'm recording. It's 12:30 Eastern here. It's just not the situation, unfortunately, to make it work. Also, Ulysses says, what does anthropomorphics mean? We're talking about, things that are common human features, right? Height, reach, age, things that it doesn't matter the fight. These are information that we can discern and have huge data sets on based on, the amount of fights that have taken place. So that's all we're talking about there when we talk about anthropomorphics, and it's a term that we got from the book Fight Numbers. So we always talk about readers are leaders and note takers are money makers. Fight Numbers, great book. Fight Numbers is a great company. But Fightnomics, great book. Very, very helpful in terms of your analyzing. And anthropomorphics is the term that they used to describe those things: height, reach, age, the common human characteristics. But thank you very much for the question. I appreciate that. Now, as we, close out on this fight, what I'll say is, I think that we've seen Dan Argueta show some of his limitations. And for me, those limitations include he could tire out over the course of 15 minutes. Damn, people are saying that the volume is a bit low. I'm going to try and fix that now. Oh, what a frustration. All right, tell me if it's a little bit better now. I'm going to speak loudly, clearly, as best I can right into the microphone. Hopefully everybody can hear me loud and clear. But when we think about a fight like this, the way I break it down is, I don't think that the price is good enough to justify betting it, but I think Haddon is going to win the fight more often than not. If you look back, the win-loss record for Dan Argueta in the UFC is a little bit questionable, right? He loses to Damon Jackson. That's fair enough, right? He's up a weight class. Then he beats Njokuani, and that is a win that I don't really rate as being super substantial. Then he goes out there against Ronnie Lawrence, and Ronnie Lawrence has since retired, right? I hope that he's better in terms of his health. He's been dealing with health problems. He's been dealing with, these things. Man, I'm so disappointed by this. I'm going to have to get a new microphone. This microphone has served me well for many years, and we're just now starting to have problems for whatever reason. I'm going to make sure that my audio settings are turned up all the way. That is what I can do. I can try, but I don't know what else to do. So I'm going to speak as loud and clear into the mic as I can. If you guys have to turn it up on your audio settings, I appreciate the support. And I will just try and keep pushing because I don't know what else to do. And this is the one microphone we got for today. So we'll definitely invest in a new microphone if that's what it takes. But ultimately, I think that Dan spends a lot of energy looking for submissions in the early going. I think he looks for a pressure forward style where he's going to try and take somebody down, grind him into the ground, and I don't think Haddon's going to accept bottom position. I think he's the more effective all-around mixed martial artist. I think his striking is cleaner. I think that he's a little bit more willing to attempt submissions in transition. I think Argueta wants to establish these control positions. So I think that when I'm looking at how I see this fight going down, I'm ultimately going to pick Cody Haddon. I'm going to lean towards the decision here, but I also think Haddon, like Matsumoto, is live to take over this fight late, right? Round 2, round 3, after Argueta's pushed a heavy pace, whether you hit him to the body, whether you hit him upstairs, and then force him into bad shots from further away. I think that's the path for Cody Haddon here. So I think that's how I'm going to look in this fight, is probably leaving this one alone, but I'm leaning towards the favorite here in Cody Haddon. I just think I want to see him go out there, show it in a UFC debut. We've seen so many times talented fighters underperform in UFC debuts, so I want to see him go out there and get a win, get that under his belt, get a guy like Dan Argueta, who's been on a bit of hard times, out of the roster, maybe send him back to the LFA for some seasoning, and Cody Haddon takes that step forward. But you have to imagine it's going to be a highly motivated Dan Argueta. His career in the UFC is potentially on the line here. We've seen a lot of cuts lately, and how do they make room for these guys? You go out there and lose a couple fights in a row, they ice you out and say, hey, go back to the LFA and prove it. So for me, I agree with Huevos. I think that Haddon looked bigger. I think he looked thicker. I think he looked stronger. And I think that's only going to be exacerbated when they both rehydrate. However, we have seen, many good fighters have a tough time in a UFC debut. So those are the only things I wanted to just point out to people before we look at the next fight. And also, we'll just talk about the fact there is a slight reach advantage listed for Cody Haddon. He's the younger fighter here by 5 years, so he's checking all the anthropomorphic boxes in this matchup. Similar amount of professional experience. However, we will just note Dan Argueta, a bit higher level of experience to this point in his career. But I just think that the wins, the good performances against Ronnie Lawrence, you can kind of poke some holes in that. And I say that as somebody who bet Argueta against Ronnie Lawrence and got absolutely robbed. I had the plus 170. It was my only bet on the card, and they didn't pay it out because of the referee's malfeasance and error. But I think that when you look back at that fight, you say to yourself, man, it was a good performance from Argueta, but it said a lot about Ronnie Lawrence just not physically being what he once was. And I also think that people have that impression in their head as like, man, what a Dan Argueta performance. And I kind of think it's a little smoke and mirrors. I think he's good. I just think we've seen his ceiling. So for me, Matsumoto is another talented guy, right? Losing to him is fair play, but it's the consistency of losing a couple fights, getting a little bit more predictable over time. You know what he's going to do. His striking's not his selling point. He's going to go out there and try and wrestle and grapple. I think Haddon's going to be prepared for that. All right, guys. Next up, we've got a fun fight and an interesting fight. The UFC, I will just say this because I always pay attention to random details, right? I try and, pay attention to everything. And sometimes that'll lead you to overthink, but I just like to have a comprehensive view of these fights. I like to look at the tape. I like to look at the matchup. I like to look at the odds history. I like to try and get a really broad picture of the fight. The UFC Instagram page, you guys can go check this for yourself. They've promoted like 5 fights so far on this card, right? They don't give a rat's ass about this card hardly. They promoted both the main event fighters. That makes a lot of sense. But they also promoted Cory. And I was like, that's weird, right? They're like, she's coming back. She's back in the strawweight division. I was like, man, it's very interesting. And I faded Cory McKenna last time on this show. And if you guys, were here, I just said I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why money kept coming in on Cory McKenna. I thought that maybe there was an injury that I didn't understand. That was what I was saying on the show. I was like, maybe Amarim is, just going to be hurt, or, they know something in camp. She's been drinking, she's been boozing, she hasn't been showing up at training sessions. But I saw a video of her from the, I think it's called the Institute of Human Performance in South Florida, and she looked to be in great shape. And I was like, yeah, that's it. I'm betting it. I don't care. I'll live with the result. And it was one of the best money line bets of the year. With all due respect, that's truly how I feel. It was like plus 150 or something. And I should have absolutely max bet that. That was a great position. In this fight, though, you're not getting that same plus money tag to fade Cory McKenna, right? And you're getting Julia Polastri at chalk. And the thing that I don't love is that Polastri has a number of losses, right? She can be outmaneuvered. She can be decisioned. She can be taken down. She can kind of make the wrong decisions in terms of optics on the feet. We saw it in her last fight with Knudsen. People have been memeing it all week on MMA Twitter. Her getting kicked in the body like 3 times in a row with the teep and then rolling her eyes, looking back with disdain. And that's just not a a great strategy, right? It's not to say that it's the worst thing you could do, right? Like just showing it and leaning over, curling into a ball from pain. Yeah, that's a worse reaction. But you just want to see somebody answer back with strikes, answer back with offense. Don't answer back with emotes, right? And we're not here to emote on people like Fortnite. We're here to try and win the fight. So for me, Polastri did leave a little bit to be desired there. And when I look at how this fight could play out, I got to just say, there's some sharp people that I respect that are on the McKenna side in this matchup. I do think there was some public interest as well on the McKenna side. She's a girl that has a, bubbly persona, right? She's well regarded. She's doing commentary on these other shows on Fight Pass. So Cory McKenna's got some visibility. I'm old enough to remember her losing to Elise Reed at home, though. Like going out there as a big favorite, dropping the ball. She's definitely burnt bettors many times in the past. I think the betting community has struggled to evaluate her fights. I look at the Polastri losses that she's had against Knudsen and against Jasmine Jasudavicius before that, and I do think to myself, those are forgivable losses. Like, I won't hold those against you too much. However, I do see the makings of a Cory McKenna win in this fight if she's to go out there and press her wrestling and her grappling. What Cory McKenna did in her last fight was she showed a really remarkably low fight IQ, and maybe that was just a result of being out of the octagon for a time. She was out of the cage for a while. She was doing commentary and all these other things. She got back in there, and it was a high-pressure fight, right? You make one mistake against a jiu-jitsu world champion like Amarim, and the fight's over. And ultimately, she lost that fight twice via submission in the first 90 seconds, right? But against most girls in the division, you assume, okay, it's not going to be just like, step 1, step 2, step 3, and it's over. Not every girl is a jiu-jitsu world champion. So Polastri, might have some aggressive subs. She might be willing to throw some stuff up off her back. But if she gets taken down in the same way Amarim got taken down, then you do have to question, what does it look like? Because for me, Cory McKenna by sub was as high as 22-1 on Bet365. And I do think that's simply off, right? If she is good enough to get this fight where she wants it, for the duration, then I think she could absolutely win this fight by submission. If we go and look at the record of Julia Polastri, it will tell you clearly why the price is so high. She's never been finished in professional martial arts, right? 4 losses, all via decision, and she's 4-0 to the knockout, 3-0 to the submission. So Polastri's had an incredible career, but if you were to just say like, all right, talent rank these two, hey, $20 dono marching order for Roman Dolidze were received. We tried to tell people when it's a Kevin Holland fight, call Big Mouth. Call Big Mouth. 20 plus units of profit on Kevin Holland fights so far in his illustrious career. And I'll tell you guys, I'll give away the secret, okay? If he's fighting a big guy at 185 that knows how to wrestle, don't play Kevin Holland. It's wraps, all right? Whether it's Derek Brunson, it was Marvin Vittori, it was how many guys gone out there and just wrestled this guy into a hole. Don't let Kevin Holland steal your bread. Here's the other thing, guys. The day Kevin Holland stopped trying to win the UFC world title was when? I'll tell you guys, if you don't know it already, the Wonder Boy fight. He went, tooth and nails with Wonder Boy. Wonder Boy goes down to the ground, and he could have been Shavkat Rakhmonov. He could have been one of these guys that went out there and submitted Wonder Boy, claimed it. And what did he do instead? He shook his hand, let him back up to his feet, and then got knocked out by his buddy. Wonder Boy was more than happy to go TKO his buddy, right? But meanwhile, Kevin Holland, he had to do the nice, kind thing and not go down and submit him. So, hey, God bless him. But for me, it's not Kevin Holland a chalk ever. And Roman Dolidze continues to stand against the market, whether it was against John Alon or whether it was against all these guys. I used to lay him at chalk, and people would tell me every fight, this guy sucks. And how many stoppages does he need to get? How many finishes? How many times does he need to turn Jack Hermanson upside down, inside out, and put him face down on the canvas before people give Roman Dolidze some damn respect? Ranked at middleweight, ranked at light heavyweight. So I appreciate it. And Greenbelt, thank you so much for the dono, my man. That is absolutely critical. My guy Lando says, Liam, we would love a Lambo play for this week. If you guys missed it, the Lambo was about this close, right? We had Roman Dolidze, ITD. We had Court McGee via submission plus 800 first finish in 14 years. And we had our guy Jose Aldo by knockout, and Mario Bautista walled and stalled him into the cage. So I always say, hats off to the winner, right? I'll take my hat off to the winner. God bless him. But you know that Jose Aldo, if they got 15 minutes to work at space, might have just done something, right? He busted him up a little bit in round 2. So shout out to our guy, Jose Aldo, still a legend of the game, went out there, put it on the line, and tried to cash us that Lamborghini. But there's always this week. There's always next week. We're going to keep swinging, and eventually we're riding off into the sunset in that Lamborghini, just one leg away last week. So, hey, cheers to you guys. Thank you all for the support. The bottom line on this one is simple for me, right? You've got a young fighter here in Cory McKenna. She's a small fighter, but she's not that small compared to Polastri. You know, you look at Polastri, I think Polastri is the more effective striker, but I don't think McKenna is like dead to rights on the feet. She has a boxing game that's somewhat competent, and she probably has more takedown upside of the two upon review. So for me, I think this should be lined pretty closely. I think Polastri is the more aggressive and assertive fighter on the feet, and she does have a huge reach advantage. But aside from those factors, I do think that Polastri, her takedown defense leaves a little bit to be desired. Let's pull up UFC stats so we're not speaking out of our tuchus, right? Let's make sure that we have all facts, no promo. And we'll share this tab, guys. If you look at it, Polastri, guys, 42% takedown defense. That's subpar, right? That's below average. That's not good. And it's not good enough. And what we will do is we'll go and look at the fights, right? Because it's always important to look at the context. Gave up 4 takedowns against Jasmine Jasudavicius and then none in her 2 most recent fights. Here's the problem, though. She got doubled up on strikes by Josephine Knudsen. She got outlanded on strikes by Jasmine Jasudavicius and taken down 4 times. And her only win is over a chick that's not very good. So I do think that we have some real questions to be answered in this fight. The other thing is the following, though. Cory McKenna, guys, is not a volume machine. She's not going out there and putting up these huge striking numbers. She typically takes down her opponents, though, right? Against Kay Hansen, a purple belt, a girl who was pretty solid, she was not able to take her down. But if you look at the other fights she's had, Vanessa Demopoulos, BJJ black belt, she was able to take her down. She outboxed her on the feet. Then you look at, and honestly, that's maybe her best win ever. Then you look at the Elise Reed fight, and the Elise Reed fight, really bad look, right? She got the 3 takedowns, but she got them late. And I think that when you look at the Miranda Granger fight, I kind of throw that out of the sample size. Cheyenne Velismus, 2 takedowns, to 0. But she wasn't able to rattle off a submission attempt. That's a little disappointing to me. Here's the thing, though, guys. Look at this. If you look, let's make sure that we're looking at the right fight. So we've got 2022. I'm going to read the comments, Jay. Don't worry. We read the comments here. So we've got 2022, right? December 2022, all the way to March 16, 2024. So that's a huge layoff, right? And I do think the one upside for McKenna in this fight is that she's not coming off of such an extreme layoff. So when you look at, how I expect her to do, I think she's going to give a better performance than the last fight that we saw from her. But I don't think that she's a guarantee to go out here and win. So I will not be putting money on Cory McKenna, but my enthusiasm on Polastri has been tempered over the course of the week. I have just been pretty aggressive on Cory McKenna's not that good because I think the community sentiment is way too bullish on Cory McKenna. But now I have to go and just, ever so slightly, tilt the wheel back because I think I went a little too far in that direction. She did have the long layoff, and you want to just say she's a young fighter. She's 25 years of age. I believe she's got a brown belt. She trains with the Faber crew at Team Alpha Male. She's put in a lot of time and effort, so I think that she could show a better product here, and I don't want to counter out too early because how many times have we seen somebody comes out and makes a big improvement, shows a better product, and again, if we go back and look, one feature I love from BetMMA.tips, and this is not a paid endorsement, nothing like that, right? I pay BetMMA.tips to track my bets and use their premium service because I get so much value from the premium service. And when I look back, here's one thing that's really interesting, right? Cory McKenna, the highest recorded sub prop that they have listed for her in her UFC run, and obviously they have a couple of these that are not filled in, right? She fought a couple black belts, and those are plus infinity, so we throw those out of the sample size. But among the numbers that they have, plus 1,400 against Kay Hansen, who is a pretty solid grappler in her own right. Plus 700 it was against Elise Reed. Plus 750 it was when it cashed against Miranda Granger, and it was plus 950 against Jacqueline Amarine. Okay, so tell me this, guys: how is she plus 950 to submit a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion and 22-1 to submit, Julia Polastri, who's not a Jiu-Jitsu world champion? That's just the thing that doesn't make sense. I always look at pricing over time. So I'm just saying, if I was to bet on this fight, I would take a small stab on the prop for, McKenna to win by sub. Or I would maybe, if I wanted to be contrarian, look at the Polastri KO line. Because I do think that Polastri, aggressive, comes forward, has some power on the feet. And I do think Courtney McKenna is there to be hit. And for me, those are the kind of ways that I'd look to play this fight. Both are over 10-1. The fight to end inside the distance is a huge price. Again, despite McKenna's last fight being 90 seconds. So I just think that there's some opportunities at big plus money to play small on this fight and hope for a big return. But I just wouldn't get overly invested in either one of these women. I think there's clear flaws on both sides. Now, shout out to the chat, guys. We'll go point by point here. Cindy says valid point, and we appreciate you. Let's see. If not, I say Julia makes it a TKO or decision. She gasses a little after the second. That's an interesting note. I like Cory's sub 2-3 heavy. I think that makes sense. If it's close, the judges will give it to McKenna. That also makes sense to me. Shout out to you, Jay. I appreciate your patience. I always just try and get through my thoughts and then circle back with the chat. Past fight, just watch it closely. I think that's a good note as well, Harry. We could go and get some information from this fight and judge these women moving forward. They're 25 and 26, right? Two young women that could have a long future in the UFC. So shout out to everybody who's rocking with us. Shout out to everybody who's been commenting. Jay here is saying P greater than T. I think he's basically just mocking my my betting strategy here. But what I'm saying is just, it's not that complicated, right? If it was $950 for her to sub the last girl, either that price was insane, which I think it was, but also, like, there's no way that price could have been market-wide accurate. And then the price at plus 2,200 could also be accurate against this opponent. There's just no way. So that's the way that I see this, right? It's pretty straightforward to me. But it doesn't mean that it's going to hit, right? Like, at plus 2,200, we'll just do the math real quick. And I encourage you guys, if you've never used this before, bookmark this on your computer. It's a great resource to just go here and look, right? When you're talking about something that's plus 2,200, what we're talking about is something that should happen realistically about 4.4% of the time. So does she sub her 10% of the time? I think that's fair, right? Like, maybe 10% of the time. If it's 10%, there's a 5% edge at minimum. So that's the only thing I'm saying. Is like 10% means 90% of the time it doesn't happen. But we're just talking about the math. So I appreciate the support. And thank you very much, Jay. He says, you're a great guy. I could tell you'll do great on here. I appreciate your support, my man. Thank you. You're good, Liam. I was joking about you talking me into McKenna. That's why I'm saying it's a small exposure fight. I wouldn't go big on this, but I do think there could be some big potential returns. Also, I'm surprised a little bit in this fight to see Polastri is actually favored to win by sub substantially, right? It's like plus 600 for Polastri by sub and then 22-1 on McKenna by sub. And you'd think McKenna's the more proactive grappler of the two. That's what's a little bit surprising. I do think Polastri, big size, club and sub, those are some things that could open up for her. But ultimately, I would rather bet the end sub than Polastri sub in a heartbeat, just because you're looking at a fight where, how much of the sub equity is really wrapped up in Polastri, isolated from McKenna. I think if they're grappling, it's anybody's ball game, honestly. And I think McKenna might be a little more technical. I think Polastri might be a little more physical. All right, guys, let's move along to the next fight, and we'll share our tab over here on Tapology. Oh, God. I'll just be honest, guys. I've done tape on every fight on the card except this one. So I have not even watched a single Sean Sharaf fight. And what I will try and do is share some thoughts on Twitter. After I do the tape tonight, I'm going to write up my article in terms of the prelim picks for Roto Grinders and patrons tonight, overnight. And so in doing that, I'm going to have to do the research before I write it up. So I'll write it up. I'll have, my thoughts. I'll share it publicly. But here's what I will say. You look at the prices on this fight, and what I want to do really quick, guys, is just shout out to our friends over at Fight Numbers. If you guys have never used a service before, super helpful. You can go look at the odds board, look at all the different numbers across the way. But what we're going to do is we're just going to isolate the best market prices. So from the first fight of the night on over, we've got Clayton Carpenter sitting at a minus 200 on Circa Sports compared to Lucas Rocha, the plus 190 comeback, best available on Pinnacle Sportsbook. What does that tell us? We got sharp sports books on both sides offering the best price. That could be a difference of opinion. That could be sharps coming in on both sides at different books. Couple interesting things to note there. We look at the other fights that we've talked about. We look at Julia Polastri, minus 119, best available price on the favorite, Julia Polastri. That's at Pinnacle Sportsbook. You're looking at Bovada, plus 110, the best available comeback on Cory McKenna. And I do think there's a couple books that are still at plus 110. There was a plus 112 on FanDuel bet off the board overnight in that market. So very interesting stuff. And if you guys look, the over-under, plus 350, the best available under. I was talking about this fight is heavily juiced to go the distance. That's why I think there could be some potential value in some violence props there. Then if we look at the other fights that we've discussed, we talked about Dan Argueta. He's sitting at a plus 154, best available price on FanDuel Sportsbook. Meanwhile, Cody Haddon over at Benedict Sports is minus 160. So you're looking at some, very close market width, only a 6 cents market width on this fight. So, a lot of opportunities in the market on that fight. You're looking at an over-under where Circa is giving you the best under at plus 150. And meanwhile, Bet Online, minus 165 to the over, best available prices. All right, guys, now the fight that we're talking about, Sharaf, plus 270, the best available underdog price at ESPN Bet. Meanwhile, minus 300 on Bet Online for Junior Tafa. This is the way I see it. You look at a guy like Junior Tafa, you're never catching me laying minus 300. He doesn't have the skills to pay the bills at minus 300. Now, can he win the fight as a minus 300 favorite? Absolutely. Is he the guy who's, more tested in the UFC? Sure, no doubt about it. But when I look at the overall, abilities, his ground game is non-existent, right? It's no good. And his striking is good, but not, leaps and bounds above the division. If you look back, you go to the fight with Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who's not a bad fighter, but he's not setting the world on fire. He's got plenty of losses in his own right. He went out there and absolutely chopped him down with low kicks, brutalized him. It was an absolutely dominant affair and took it to the ground. It only took him 2 rounds to put him down with those low kicks and then finished him on the ground, face no resistance, right? Against Walter Walker, everybody was telling me, no, this is the fight, man. He's going to go out there. This is the worst Walker brother. And we called, I believe, Walker by sub. Let's go back and check because I never want to speak out of turn here. If I got it wrong, I'll definitely tell you. So we'll look and we'll pull up what I had on Walter Walker. And this must have been, was that UFC? What fight was that, man? Walter Walker. When did he fight? UFC 305. Here we go. So we're going to share this tab instead and look for it. Scrolling. Ha! There it is. Walter Walker defeats Junior Tafa via sub or decision. We were there. We were there, guys. And if you look back, here's what I said about him. Tafa is the local market fighter. He's a more nimble athlete, and he should have the clear advantage if this fight takes place at distance based on speed, power, and superior technique. The problem is I expect Walter Walker to get takedowns early in this fight, and I haven't seen anything from Tafa to suggest he has the skills necessary to build back up to his feet. Does that sound familiar? This guy is no good at the wrestling grapple. That's the way that I see it, okay? So if he's not good at that, then I'm going to go see if this guy Sharaf is any good at that, right? And it seems like, to me, I'll just level with you guys. This guy, I'm happy for him that he's getting his opportunity. I wish him nothing but the best. For all I know, he could be a great man, a great American, a great teammate, all these things. But all I could do is sit here from my analyst chair and call it the way I see it. The guy does not look like an athlete, personally, right? He does not look to me like a very serious, competitor, right? And maybe that's all going to be different, right? Maybe when I watch the tape, I'm like, no, don't judge a book by its cover. Like, this guy is the truth. But I can only just look at the fact that the guy looks like he's coming in with a lot of extra weight, right? And again, at heavyweight, that's not uncommon. But I think that you look at a guy like Tafa, and he does look more athletic naturally, right? He's not a great athlete himself, right? Neither one of these guys going to go win a Mr. Olympia with all due respect. But what you do see is those two guys are, a little bit different in shape, right? A little bit more length, a little bit more build, a little bit more snap, you would guess, from a Tafa brother. And then meanwhile, on the other side, this Sean Sharaf guy seems like, just a very big build. He reminds me almost of like a Sean Jordan type build. And Sean Jordan was a freak athlete, right? So you never know. But I don't know if I see it, right? And a lot of these wins seem to be extremely low level. He's on a 6-fight win streak. His wins are over 0-0 Ryan Caceres, 0-0 Lorenzo Guzman, 1-4 Bruno Casillas, 0-0 Nathan Mullet, great name, 0-1 Shadrick Kindle, and then 3-1-1 LJ Torres. So the LJ Torres win, shout out to him, right? Like, hats off. That's a great, win for him. But super inexperienced, local Vegas guy. Maybe he's got something to offer. If he's got takedowns, I'll consider it a dogger pass. If he doesn't, he's probably out there as a sacrificial lamb. But even still, I always think about a puncher's chance. And do I really want to go lay 75% with a guy whose best attributes are like standing on the feet, trading shots, and taking a little bit more risk? I always say, if somebody can go out there and grapple, negate somebody's chance to hit them and hurt them, that for me is a lot more low variance. Whereas if somebody's going to go out there and trade blows in a heavy weight class, it doesn't matter if they're really good. They could still get clipped on the chin. So for me, that's the biggest downside with big favorite prices on Junior Tafa. I don't think the Tafa brothers are ever minus 300 ever, period. That's the way I see it. Okay, we're getting rich playing the decision plus 600 when these two gas. I absolutely love the contrarian take. That record and the guy isn't plus 500 against Tafa. Yeah, interesting. I think that's an interesting note. I'm not betting Tafa. This is an easy fight to pass. I agree. Shout out to my guy Balboa Fight Picks, one of my compatriots over there, and he's doing a great job on all his analysis. So make sure you check out his stuff at Balboa Fight Picks. One of my guys, very, very sharp out there. You can see for yourself the work that he puts in. High quality stuff. Londo says, I bet Walker, ITD, easy money. We love to see it. Do we see our second titty punch KO here? Very, very possible. We always love to see that. Shout out to our guys over at Fight Numbers. Londo giving them a vote of confidence. Our guy, John Kelly, very quality DFS projections. If you guys are interested in that side of the game, if you're interested in the fight betting side of the game, like we are on this show, then one of the things that we're constantly looking for is the best available price. And if you're looking for the best available price, the thing that we've been talking about, guys, the odds screen, very helpful, simple tool. And whether you want to view it like this, right, where you're looking at all the best prices, or whether you want to look at the entire market across the board, price by price, you can look at it however you feel. You can get whatever, resources that you want that help you. I think that's the way that I use it for myself. Could vary for you. So overall, great service, great product, great people behind it. The free show that they do every week on YouTube, I think that you guys should all be checking out if you're not already. I always talk about, don't just listen to my analysis. There's a lot of great, sharp people in the space. I appreciate that you guys come here for my analysis. I will always bring it to you, but there's sharp people that will agree and disagree on these fights, and I won't always get it right. So I always want to let you guys know the truth. A lot of people will spin you a web of bullshit. We never get it wrong. We're always fucking on point. Everything's perfect. What I'll do is I'll celebrate the wins. We're always going to be happy when we get it right. We put a lot of time, effort, and energy in. But we'll own the losses as well. And we're not going to pretend that our shit don't stink. We've had times when we were up 99 units in a year. We've had times when we were struggling, pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps. So each and every time, we're going one by one. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate everybody that is rocking with us. Appreciate our guy Balboa. He sees the inside information. And I'm kidding, of course. We put this out on Patreon. We put this out for channel members as well. My in-depth info for all these fights, the breakdowns, the write-ups, all the resource documents, everything that we're doing there. So I appreciate the vote of confidence, my brother. So thank you guys so much for the support. And thank you to everybody who's tuning in. We're about to move to the next fight on the card here. Shout out to JJ for the kind words. Says Liam is the man, very hard worker. We still put in the work each and every time, my brother, because the bookie is not going to pay you for the work that you did last week. It's always right back to work this time. So let's go ahead and see if we can make a profitable night happen at UFC Vegas 98. And the next fight up, guys, is Niko Price against Themba Gorimbo. And if you guys have been following the show for a long time, I love that they've been putting Themba Gorimbo and Tatsuro Taira on the same card, because these are two of my boys. And if you guys know, I try and look at different ways to approach this fight game. And one thing I do is I find people that the community hate for no reason, and I bet on them. And Roman Dolidze is an example where, you could hate him for all these legitimate reasons, illegitimate reasons, whatever. But a lot of people just didn't like him. They had a sour taste for him in their mouth. So they wanted to see him fail, and they're willing to bet their hard-earned dollars against him as a result. And for me, I try not to approach it that way, right? And when I'm looking at this, I say to myself, okay, I've got a fight with Themba Gorimbo, who the UFC has strapped a rocket to his back. He came in on short notice. He took a tough fight. He took a tough L. And since then, they've tried to matchmake him appropriately. Hey, here's the right time, the right guy, and a good winnable opportunity, marketable opportunities. They signed a deal with The Rock, Project Rock. They said, hey, let's sign up with this guy. And Rock's favorite fighter is Themba Gorimbo. It's not Colby Covington. It's not, one of these guys at the top of the bill. It's not one of these guys in South Florida. It's Themba Gorimbo. He bought him a house. And so I was like, when everybody else in the community is telling you fade the guy that The Rock bought a house, I was like, don't do that. I think that that's a bad idea. I also think that it's funny that my guy, Real Fight Pick, says Liam about to overthink himself into taking Niko. You must be out your goddamn mind. I ain't turning my back on Themba. What are you, crazy? But shout out to our guy, Jewish Better, the latest channel member, an absolute OG supporter, and one of my guys in the space. So thank you so much for the support, my brother. Means the world to me, and we're always going to keep it pushing here, keep it rolling. We're going to have more and more stuff dropping for channel members in the near future, live streams as well when we get that vote going. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about my thoughts on this fight, and we're going to make it very clear and simple. I love and respect Niko Price. He is a tough guy. He's a guy that's a willing fighter. I said earlier today, he's never been afraid to step into the fire. That's a fact. You look at his career, he's gone against tough guy after tough guy. He goes out there and swings and goes crazy. But here's the truth. I think Niko Price's cardio is shoddy. I think it comes and goes. I think there's been times when he really tries to push it, and then you see the absolute ceiling on his cardio. He has gone out there, guys, and looked like he was about to take out Phil Rowe, and then he just gassed out completely and got finished in the third round, and it's not the only time he's done that. I know that he's had a couple of nice wins and nice knockouts and things like this. He does have power. I've said before, he's got some of the weirdest power in the history of the UFC. Laying on his back, throwing up hammer fists, throwing up kicks to the head. He's knocked people clean out. Very impressive stuff. But the way I see this fight is I've seen a diminished version of Niko Price in the recent years. He's been getting finished more frequently. He's been getting put in very compromised situations and positions. I also tweeted out a video of Pat Sabatini, guys, a 145-pound fighter, very talented, very skilled, but a 145-pound fighter who easily took him down, took his back, and put him in a Suluev stretch, forced him to submit very quickly. So I look at a guy like Niko Price as not very skilled, right? He's not skilled, but he's not very skilled. He's all right in terms of skills. He's been around for a long time. He's an absolute veteran. I think he's mostly held together by tape and string. He's had a very long fighting career of car crash fights. And I think that when you look at the opposite side, I think Themba Gorimbo has gotten better at making his fights less wild. His fights used to be crazy, back and forth. We go, I swing, you swing, I fall over the top, you fall over the top. And he's gotten a lot more patient and also assertive. He does these mantras. He talks to himself and says, I am a winner in life. I will win this fight. He always talks in the affirmative. This guy, Themba Gorimbo, changed his sports psychology to the fact that everything is a guarantee. I will win. I'm going to. I've already seen it. I'm going to knock this guy out. And I think people give him a lot of grief for the Takashi Sato fight. And I will just tell you guys, I messaged my guy Themba before the fight. I said, Themba, I think you can knock this guy out. I think you can go out there and finish this guy. He said, I'm going to knock this guy out. And if you go back and watch, he drops him badly with a shot. Falls into the ground, looks for the sub, couldn't do it. And then what ended up happening, right? You look at a guy like Themba. He went out there, he looked for the finish, and he kind of spent a lot of energy. But Themba, after the fight, said to me, my man, I was sick. And he looked like he was sick, right? Like he went out there, he spent all this energy, and he just had to hold on for dear life as the fight got extended, right? But I think about this fight and I say, you've got a guy like Themba Gorimbo who went out there and knocked out Pete Rodriguez, never gave him, a chance to breathe in that fight. I had the KO plus 540. I had Themba ITD. It was one of the fastest cashes that you'll ever see. And in this fight, I was surprised to see Themba ITD at such a big plus money number. I think Ramiz Brahima is, sound enough in his grappling that it was going to be difficult to submit him. And when we've seen him get, finished with strikes, he got his ear exploded, right? And that was the stoppage, I believe, against Max Payne Griffin. But I think that when I look at this, I say, a guy like Themba at minus 3XX, it's a little bit price prohibitive. It's not to say that he doesn't win. I do think he wins. I think he probably wins around the rate that they expect. I think that if Niko Price wins, it's correlated with him hurting Themba. I do think Themba could be clipped on the chin. That is the biggest concern I would have for him in this fight. Potentially gassing out, I suppose. But honestly, I think Themba has a better cardiovascular base than Niko Price. I think that Themba has more power on the feet at this stage of their career. I think Niko Price maybe had that distinction at one point in their career. And I also think that when I look at Themba's ability right now in the grappling, I think he's getting better. I think he's showing a better product each time out. I think he's showing a more physical product each time out. And I think the opposite is true for Niko Price. I think the writing is on the wall for him in terms of long-term, his ability to take damage, his ability to fight for 15 hard minutes. I think both of those things have taken a hit in recent years. So we love and appreciate Niko Price. We respect him very much on this show and always will. He's gone out there and given us a lot of great memories. And he got fouled badly against Michel Pereira, and they just let him get away with it because they always do. But that dude just did a backflip onto my guy Niko Price's head and got no penalty for it. So Niko Price, OG of the game, plus 300. I can't blame you if you take the shot. But truthfully, I would be more interested in the fight not to go, the under Themba inside the distance, something like that, because I just think Themba is a little bit too fast, too dynamic, too assertive right now. I think he's going to hurt Niko, and whether he clubs and subs him or does what he did to Pete Rodriguez and just hits him with the big shots on the ground, I think it's just going to be all she wrote. I think Themba's going to win this fight and finish it. Shout out to Jeremiah, says, Liam, it's 1:14 and you're live. You're amazing. I appreciate you. It's always my pleasure. I got this nice cup of coffee here to keep the juices flowing. I've got 317 great people rocking with us live, 106 people rocking with us on YouTube. If you guys don't mind, go ahead and hit that like button. It's a great, easy way to show support, and I truly appreciate it. If you guys are rocking with us on X, go ahead and hit that retweet. Let's get more people in here. Let's expand the conversation. We got a lot of great people already in here. We got a lot of very sharp people rocking with us. Our guy, Pianteo, says coffee at 1:15 a.m. I just got to tell you, the truth is, I've got articles to write. I've got work left to do. The job's never done on a fight night. So for me, I am excited about the process. I got a lot still left to do, and I'm eager to get into the rest of the work. So for me, the work never stops, brother. I appreciate the support, and I appreciate everybody rocking with us. Our guy Balboa has just became a member as well in the YouTube community. What a absolute soldier. Appreciate everybody for the support. Cory knows job is not finished. That's exactly what we're doing here. And we always know we've got people, Glenbot, 6:15 a.m. here. I'm waiting for the coffee shop to open. I love it. Glenbot up early, ready to rumble. Jeremiah says New York in the building. Absolutely. We're rocking live from New York, the great state. Thank you so much for the support. And wherever you're joining us from, thank you and salute you guys. I appreciate you guys showing love and support at this hour. I know you guys got a lot of choices with your entertainment, and I appreciate you guys tuning in and supporting me. Now, looking at this next fight, I think we've got a fascinating one here, guys. I'll tell you, unfortunately, if you guys have ever bet on sports for a long time, then you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? If you've bet profitably, especially on sports, what happens is, guys, they do not let you bet anymore, right? Like, that part of the issue with being a successful bettor is that companies no longer want to take your action. So you have to then find companies like Bet Online and places offshore that are willing to book your action, because you look at some of these shops and they're embarrassing with their standards, right? You want to go in and bet, $50, $100, $200, and they don't want to take it. They want to take $10. They want to take $4.50, right? BetMGM will take $2 from me, right? So why would I log in, right? I might as well just, erase the account. It's not worth anything to go bet $2 on anything hardly, right? So when I look, if I was, if it's a parlay, something like that, maybe, but I'm just saying, like, it's not really worth my time to go on and log in and do all this stuff for them to only accept a $2 bet from me. And I did try to bet this, so I will share with you guys. I had an idea. I had a goal. I wanted to go out there and bet one unit on the fight not to go the distance here at plus 125. And unfortunately, the sports book that had the plus 125, the nice shiny number that I was looking at, it unfortunately, they would only let me get down $10. So I'm not going to track a $10 bet. But I did share it with people on the Patreon when I saw it. I said this price will not last. It's now down to plus 115 on that same book. I expect that it will close probably plus 110 or below. Frankly, I just think it should be minus 110 or a little bit further in terms of the favorite status. Now, here's what makes this fight interesting. You have on the one hand a Pat Sabatini, who typically has been winning via decision in some of these UFC contests, but you know that he's got excellent grappling. You know that he has excellent transitions. His submissions are fantastic. His submission over Jamal Emmers was extremely impressive when you consider the fact he was hurt, he was rocked, and also he was able to get a hold of the leg and absolutely rip the knee apart. So it's one thing, right, to try and get a hold of somebody and force them to tap. Right? If you force somebody to tap, hey, good on you. You won the contest. But it's a whole nother thing to know that your braking mechanics are perfect, right? And the way you knew his braking mechanics are perfect is that he got rocked badly, and then he was able to latch onto the heel hook. And when he exerted pressure on the heel hook, he absolutely destroyed his training partner's knee. In this case, it's Jamal Emmers, his opponent. Training partner is the interchangeable word in jiu-jitsu, but he absolutely destroyed his knee, guys, and it's because Jamal Emmers was looking for the toe hold, an inferior hold, and Pat Sabatini, despite being rocked, locked in that heel hook and just ripped his leg into pieces. And that's what a really good jiu-jitsu guy can do. You look at Pat Sabatini, I already mentioned him once today. He went out there and tapped Niko Price with a Suluev stretch. That's kind of a fancy move. It's almost like he went out there and did a little style points on Niko Price, and Niko Price is a welterweight. Right, I believe he's only been submitted by the very prolific Darce of Vicente Luque. And this is off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and double check. But if you look, he's not been a mark to the submission in mixed martial arts. And he got absolutely cleaned up by Pat because Pat is the real deal Holyfield when it comes to the grappling. But he's a much better grappler than he is a fighter. And it's not because he's not a good fighter. It's because he knows that he can't take a great shot. And so it makes him fight a little bit panicky, a little bit jittery. He's not comfortable in the stand-up phase, and he can't take a great shot. So those are two things that are not conducive to winning mixed martial arts contests as opposed to winning grappling matches where his confidence is through the roof. He's like, this guy can't punch me. He can't hit me. I can't get knocked out. I'm going to do very well in this contest. And that, I think, is a huge difference for him. So what I've seen from Pat Sabatini that makes me think he has a better chance in this fight than some of his recent fights is twofold. Number one, you look at the Damon Jackson fight. Damon Jackson fought against archetype there. Damon Jackson's normally a guy that comes out and, he might mix in some striking and some offensive attempts, but a lot of times he wants to wrestle. He wants to grab a hold of you, and he didn't do that, right? He had just lost his brother, and, it's a terrible story. You guys can look into it yourself. I don't want to bring down the mood of the show, but when you look at what we saw there, Damon Jackson basically sprinted out the gates, punted him in the face, and, Pat could never recover. You look at the fight against Diego Lopes. Who wants to fight Diego Lopes right now? Like, our guy Brian Ortega's got a chin from just south of Hades, and he took punches to the chin that would have killed mortal men from Diego Lopes. Otherwise, he would have gotten knocked the hell out like all these other guys. And you look at Diego Lopes, he is on fire right now. He's just been the hottest guy in the division. So you got a guy in Pat Sabatini with a very respectable record, guys. 5-2 in the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, great promotion, and the losses are respectable, right? Damon Jackson's a solid guy, not a great loss, but at least you understand the circumstances. You can say, hey, he kind of fought against type. He caught him on the chin, caught him early, right? When you're still out there, a little bit early fight chin. Our guy Gugabe, very sharp guy, talks about it. You often see guys have a different chin in the first minute than they do 5 minutes into a fight. You get hit once, you start to get a little more comfortable, you get into the fight, then you're not as scared to get hit anymore. But when you're first out there, it's a very nerve-wracking process. And I do think for Pat Sabatini, he's come out very stiff and very stressed in the past. When I look at this fight, he's been working with a sports psychologist, and I think that could have a huge impact, right? Am I saying it's a one-to-one? It's going to have a huge impact? only he knows, right? Only he knows the mental work that's been put in. But he said, I'm excited to go out there and test myself. I'm excited to go out there and compete. I know what I'm capable of. He said, I'm going to get to my positions. I'm going to capitalize when I'm there. I'm going to put damage on this guy, or I'm going to look to submit him. I was hearing a lot of the right things from Pat Sabatini. You look at the Lucas Almeida fight, it shows you what he's capable of. Jonathan Pearce is a better grappler than Lucas Almeida, but Lucas Almeida, strong guy, a resilient enough guy, wants to be out there, has gone 15 minutes with some guys, and what happened to him in that fight, right? Pat Sabatini took him down. He absolutely beat the shit out of him, right? He was sitting on top of him, punching him ruthlessly, and then eventually he was able to wrap him up. And you see that Pat Sabatini can be very effective as an MMA top player. And I think Jonathan Pearce has had flashes of problems in his wrestling and his grappling in the past, right? Not to say he's bad there. He's very good there. That's where he likes to exert his pressure. I bet on him scorecards equal no action against Kai Kamaka plus 210 all the way back in 2020. You guys know I've been doing this stuff for a long time. But when you look at JSP, the Lozon fight, you could write off, hey, it's a UFC debut. He's against a super vet. You can kind of just make a couple excuses for him. But I do think, eventually you got to say, man, the guy's fighting a perfect fight against Brito, starts talking shit, lets the guy get up and then gets choked out. It's just how do you forgive that? At minus 180 chalk, this guy could have the fight of his life and then just go out there and fumble it away, right? That for me is the thing that makes him hard to put my faith in. I think he's got a clear path to victory, which is clip Pat on the chin, hurt him, get him uncomfortable, get him out of there. We know that JSP has good ground and pound. We know that Pat is uncomfortable on the feet. But I think that on the other side, if this guy, JSP, goes to what he normally does, he says, I don't want to wrestle this guy. I don't want to grapple this guy. I'm going to hurt him. But if he does go back to what he defaults to, his normal game, then I think he's going to give Pat ample opportunities to try and lock in a submission attempt. But also, if Pat gets on the top position, I'm just telling you guys, be weary. Pat Sabatini can put an absolute shellacking on somebody from the top position. And we've seen that happen to JSP before, where Joe Lozon gets the arm tucked behind his head and he's just beating him up and there's nothing he could do about it. I do think sometimes that's the downside of a guy like Pearce's game. He wants to be in there, create a fire, make it a dogfight. And sometimes if you do that against guys who are really technical, they could just expose some of the flaws that you have in your positioning. And Pearce has got that long old neck. He kind of sticks it out there when he's trying to grapple people sometimes. And I do think if Pat Sabatini is able to, generate some exchanges, get in on the hips, then he's going to be able to create some opportunities for himself, whether that's with the submission game or whether that's trying to go, 2 hooks in, barrel the, forearms out from under the guy and just ground and pound him. So I think those are both opportunities. And for me, both guys have a clear path to a finish, right? And that's the kind of thing I'm looking for in a fight not to go the distance. So at plus money, that was somewhat appealing to me. But I'll just level with you guys. I didn't track it because I couldn't get down more than a couple bucks at the good number. So if the line comes back up, if I'm able to find another book with the same price, these kind of things, maybe I'll get involved. But ultimately, what it is what it is, like my guy James Brown says. To be honest, Niko Price might win, says Pianteo. Themba looked like crap in his last fight. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of recency bias, Pianteo, but I could be wrong. So fair play. I think Niko Price is a seasoned vet. Wouldn't blame you for the price, but ironically, price. But I think that Themba looking like crap in his last fight was because he was fighting a guy who could just negate some of the grappling that he wanted to implement. And also a guy that kind of just settled into losing a fight via decision. And I don't think Niko Price is like that at all. I think Niko Price is going to fight till the bitter end, and that might mean he gets finished brutally here, but it also means he's going to try and give himself a chance, in my view. Shout out to JP Taylor, says, Sawbucks MMA tips. Just retweeted for you, Liam. Cheers, and enjoying some late night Java myself. Hey, cheers to that. Nothing better than that, brother. God bless you for it. Thanks to everybody who's rocking with us. We're circling back with the chat before we move on to the next fight. JSP being able to get a cardio attritional finish and Pat sub at plus money. The fight doesn't go the distance. Number is puzzling. Shout out to you, Glenbot. I agree with you. Yeah, Pat at sub at plus 600 is nice. One thing I want to do real quick, guys, is like I did for the Cory McKenna fight, let's go back and look. We have a 7-fight sample size now for Pat Sabatini inside the UFC. So let's just go ahead and glance at the sub prop and see what we can learn. So if you look back, he was plus 350 to submit Tristan Connolly, did not come through. Plus 502 to submit Jamal Emmers. Guys, I believe at the casino live with my buddy, I'll have to double check. But I believe at the casino live with my buddy, I had Sabatini inside the distance plus 550 against this guy. So around what they're saying the sub price is, I had Pat Sabatini inside the distance, and everybody had Jamal Emmers at the casino. And so the place went silent when Pat Sabatini submitted him after getting knocked down, and me and my boy were the only ones jumping up and down for joy. So that was a fun one to look back on. But also, if you look, he has never been above plus 500 to win a UFC fight by sub, guys. So this is the biggest price that it's ever been. It's not to say it's going to cash, but again, a guy who's 5-2 in the UFC, he's prolific as a submission artist. I think you can do worse than sprinkling that plus 600, plus 650 on the submission prop. And I also think the ITD being such a big price is a little bit off as well. Again, considering he cashed as a plus 400 ITD before, I think it's plus 450 right now. And he's never been that price to win ITD again, right? He was plus 175 against Almeida ITD, plus 400 ITD against Emmers, and then always lower than plus 400 ever since. So for me, you're getting big numbers based on some recency bias. Frankly, I do think if you were to ask the question this way, right? If JSP was to fight Diego Lopes today, who wins the fight? I think that Diego Lopes would finish JSP probably via submission and probably in the first round or two. But would I be stunned if he hurt him on the feet? I wouldn't. Right? So I would favor Diego Lopes definitely, and that's why I don't want to over-interpret the result. I would favor JSP against Lucas Almeida as well. So it's a little bit of give and take. But the win streak from Pat Sabatini, it's not going to blow your hair back, right? Tristan Connolly, Jamal Emmers, Tucker Lutz, and TJ Laramie. It's not a great list of names, but the best one of the bunch was Jamal Emmers, and he found a way to submit that guy at a similar price. So again, I just think that that's a kind of win that deserves respect. And if Pat's able to capitalize on, some sports psychology, then God bless him for it. But I certainly won't be laying a chalk price on either guy in this fight. I think both guys have huge liabilities, and I think JSP should be favored, but I think the price is prohibitive. I would make him a short favorite in this fight just because, durability is a big factor, right? In a cage fight, if I can't trust your durability, it's hard for me to favor you in the fight. But if this is a fight about technique and who's better at grappling, I think Pat Sabatini wins the fight. And Haunter says, this is a simple fight. Sabatini either gets bonked or gets a sub. 145-pound Paul Craig. I love it. Daz, even his ITD is plus 450 because I'm afraid he snaps a limb. That is possible. I will also just say, Pat Sabatini did lose by KO once, and it's on his record. People have it shows 3 losses by KO, TKO. One of them, guys, was he got armbarred and his arm got snapped in half. So don't think that just because you see a KO on somebody's record, you always have to go back and watch it for yourself. That one was crazy because I think it was James Gonzalez goes for an armbar, and Pat Sabatini pulls his arm out, realizes it's broken, and the look on his face was just pure frustration and disappointment. So always crazy to see those kind of grappling upsets. But for me, that was a cool one to watch. All right, guys. Let's move on to the next one. And we've got CJ Vergara taking on Ramazan Temirov. And hooey! Let's go do this for a second, guys. I haven't shown you the social media A-side report for this week's card, but let's take a look at it. Social media A-side report, UFC Vegas 98. And here's what we're going to do for you guys real quick, okay? We're going to scroll down to the biggest social media followings on the card. And you guys will know a lot of these names, right? Themba Gorimbo, no surprise. Tatsuro Taira, no surprise. Niko Price, Daniel Rodriguez, Brandon Royval. These are guys that have been around the UFC for a long time. Makes sense. How about this one, guys? Ramazan Temirov puts them all to shame. 629,000, right? This guy's a big star globally, at least as far as social media followings go, right? This guy is putting up numbers, right? This guy's drawing some attention. So what does that tell me? That tells me the UFC would like to try and set him up for success. The UFC doesn't always do that right. The UFC tried to set up Anshul Jubilee for success against Mike Breeden. How'd that turn out, right? They always try and go out there and find these, what I would call, respectfully, enhancement talents. And that doesn't mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean they can't fight. It's just to say they're not there to be promoted. They're there to promote others, right? You want to see a guy like CJ Vergara, go out there and test guys and see if they're good enough to compete at the UFC level. You're not going to put CJ Vergara in a title fight, right? That's just the way that it goes. Londo says, Temirov, easy money, ITD, highlight reel finish. I think it's possible. right? If you look at Temirov's style, he's a knockout artist. He likes to go out there, skirt around the outside, use his ability to spin, his ability to create power, overhand right, overhand swang. He likes to just throw hard with committed strikes and take people out. I think his defense leaves a little bit to be desired. I don't know that Vergara is the guy who's necessarily going to make you pay. But here's the one thing I will note. His cardio has checked out in his previous fights, but I mentioned it on some other fights that we've talked about, and it's something I'll always mention. How is somebody's cardio going to translate at the UFC level? Are they going to have a gas out in their UFC debut? Those are always some things that I worry about, right? It's not to say that it's a one-for-one relationship. We've seen plenty of guys go out there and look great in their first fight, but oftentimes somebody's subject to an underperformance in their UFC debut. When you look at a guy like CJ Vergara, what's interesting about his career is he's 3-3 in the UFC. He's struggled to make weight for a lot of these contests, but you look at Asu Almabayev, right? He loses a decision there. He made Asu Almabayev work pretty hard. Almabayev, guys, is 3-0 in the UFC. He beat Jose Johnson via unanimous decision the fight after that, but he was able to submit Ode Osborne quite easily, right? And when you look at the difference between him and Vergara, Vergara was able to create more resistance. He was able to make it a much more challenging fight. And then you look at CJ Vergara's other fights in the UFC, and he has wins over Vinicius Salvador, Daniel Lacerda, and Clayton Rodriguez. And none of those are wins that I really rate out as being, super impressive. What a killer, what great wins. But they are UFC level guys. You know what you're getting. And I think about this fight and say, okay, the downside is Vergara almost got splattered against Daniel Lacerda. So that's possible that he gets splattered here. Then Daniel Lacerda gassed out. He was able to find his comeback, right? You look at his other fights. His losses in the UFC are Ode Osborne, and that was a close fight, right? A fight that probably could have went either way. He was an underdog. He missed weight for that fight, and he just got outworked a little bit in the end of the day. Close fight, but he came on strong in round 3. Then you look at the Bruno Correa fight, absolutely killed him in the first round. He won against Clayton Rodriguez. Rodriguez has kind of been exposed a little bit in the UFC. He lost to headliner Tatsuro Taira, and Tatsuro Taira was able to put him through the paces in the grappling. That's been his biggest flaw, guys. If you look throughout his career, he did get hurt badly against Daniel Lacerda, but his biggest flaw has been his ability to deal with the wrestling and the grappling, and that's where he has struggled, right? And I just don't know that Temirov is going to put him in the wrestling and the grappling situations. I think Temirov's best chance to win this fight is the knockout. I think he's also live to win a decision. But if you look, Temirov is not a very good submission grappler, right? He's 1-1 career to the submission. I don't love that, right? Especially in the flyweight division coming in. Flyweight is a division where there's a lot of scrambles. There's a lot of crazy stuff that could happen. I do think Tristan makes a good point. He's got real power. He's not a bad fighter. But I just think that the lack of a substantive ground game is a little bit concerning for the price tag, right? I don't think his wrestling's great. I think he can give up some takedowns. He's fighting out of the Muradov team. And I'll just note to you guys, Makhmud Muradov is another guy I've faded in the UFC when appropriate, because I wasn't really sure what the level was, right? I wasn't really sure if that guy was as real as he was being made out to be. And then when he got finished by Gerald Mearshart, I think it did show a little bit of the limitations, right? Maybe the wrestling and the grappling isn't quite up to snuff. And that is, for me, the biggest liability with this guy. He's on a 9-fight win streak. He's done a great job. He's got the huge following coming in. We know that they want to set him up for success. But I just think that CJ Vergara has had the more relevant experience at this point in his career. And I think that, he kind of needs this win in order to keep his contract going. He's coming off of a loss. He's 3-3 in the promotion, probably rounding out to the last 2 fights on his deal. And he had a canceled bout with Azat Maxim where both fighters withdrew from the contest. So this is now, a tough fight. They're not booking him easy. But I do think that CJ Vergara is a guy that's way overperformed his expectations in the UFC. I think he's been an underdog in all of his fights, if my memory serves. So let's go back and look at CJ Vergara. And I'm wrong. He was favored to beat Daniel Lacerda. He was favored to beat Vinicius Salvador. But he did defeat Clayton Rodriguez as an underdog. That was a big underdog cash for him. And I don't know what he was against Bruno Correa, but I believe he was an underdog as well. Haunter says Temirov has 1 sub. Yep. There's no sub equity. He doesn't have a ground game. Fair enough. Charlie Zelenoff says, Liam, what a cool MF name. Absolutely. CJ Vergara is about to lose a decision. That's always possible. And flyweight historical decision rate is 55% going back a few years. Interesting. Always, I like to check my guy Nate Latshaw. He has the 3-round and 5-round data separated out. You can go by weight class. So shout out to Nate Latshaw. Free resources, great for the community. If you guys have never checked it out, I super encourage you to check out Nate Latshaw's great work. In terms of statistics, it's some of the best stuff that you'll find in the space. CJ can certainly be finished, says Londo. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it can never happen. I totally agree with that. Also, I think that the most competitive fight is a fight that goes the distance here. I think if this fight ends inside the distance, it's more likely that Temirov catches Vergara. Because if you look at Vergara, he did get rocked really badly against Lacerda, and he started sprinting sideways around the octagon. That showed a little bit of veteran savvy. It showed a little bit of want. Like, he does not quit on himself easily. But also it showed he can be hurt, he can be rocked, he can be wobbled. So I think Temirov is going to come out and try and, like, go for a home run, like, big kick, try and take his head off. But I do just think to myself, like, could this fight get greasy in rounds 2 and 3? I think it could. And that for me is why, what's his name? Vergara by decision at 7-1 is, for me, most of his win equity in this fight. He's like a split decision type guy. And yeah, that's kind of the way I see this one going. Good stuff, guys. I appreciate everybody for the support. I've been cutting back on my prop plays, especially the unders and violence props. Yeah, this year that's been a wise decision, right? We've seen a lot of fights that have gone, deep this year, right? 5-rounders, a lot of fights going the distance. I do think there's a chance that we start seeing a little regression there, but we have to just note what we've seen. And they changed the gloves as well, so it's not like there hasn't been a variable that could be contributing to the regression in knockouts. We've seen many fewer this year. All right, guys. Daniel Rodriguez, Alex Morono is up next. This one's going down in the welterweight division. And if D-Rod was not 37 going on 38, I think that he would be pretty damn solid. When you're looking at this fight, I think he's a little bit more dangerous. I think he's the guy who's got way better metrics on the feet. I think his ground game is a little suspect. But I think that when you look at D-Rod in terms of stand-up fighting, he's just a more effective and dangerous guy than Alex Morono, in my view. When you look at Morono, I haven't loved what I've seen from him lately. I think he's coming into more of these fights underprepared, let's say, with a little bit of skinny, fat build. And D-Rod, in his last fight, he kind of got screwed, right? They showed up, and Kelvin had weight complications. We'll just leave it there. Couldn't make the weight. Forced him to bump up. He's had all these different, pull out, cancellation, all this bullshit. And so the UFC signed him on an extended contract, even though he lost, right? Because he's gone out there and really given them a lot. He went out there against Ian Gary when Ian Gary was significantly favored. And a lot of people were telling me, like, yo, Ian Gary, what is he doing as a favorite against D-Rod? And he absolutely kicked his head off. The first guy to ever stop him with strikes. You look at D-Rod, he's been finished twice in his last couple of losses, and he had never been finished prior. But if you do look back at, like, the Dwight Grant fight, he was very badly hurt there. So he can be hurt, he can be rocked, he can be wobbled. But what I've seen from D-Rod is he's just more effective than Morono on the feet. I think he throws more. I think he's going to land more. So unless Morono wrestles, which he really does not do, and unless he's able to get him down, which I don't really expect, then I think D-Rod is just going to win a fight that takes place on the feet, either by knocking out Alex Morono, by hurting Morono, forcing a bad shot and putting him in that standing guillotine like he did Tim Means, or by walking him down and winning a decision. I think it's a competitive enough fight that I'm not, bullish on laying big chalk prices with a 37-year-old, but I just rate Daniel Rodriguez as a little bit higher than Morono. I think Morono is more of a coach. I think D-Rod is more of a fighter and an athlete, so that's the way I see it. I think Morono is a good measuring stick, but he's not very durable. And I think that we've seen a couple older fighters take advantage of that fact. Ponzinibbio comes to mind. Anthony Pettis spinning head kicking him comes to mind. And I think D-Rod is going to remind people what time it is in this fight with his boxing and probably hurt Alex Morono really bad. Going to be honest, the cards these days are so weak. I can't disagree with you there. I think the main event is fun, but it's definitely a weaker card this week. D-Rod needs a win bad. I agree with you, Cory. D-Rod decision for Glenbot. I don't think that's a bad look. Morono, vast majority of his losses are via decision. This is Ben Askren level spinning back fist. Oh, goodness. I'm never betting Morono again after the last one. Yeah, he's a very strange fighter, man. Sometimes he makes really good tactical decisions and goes out there and wins rounds, minutes, fights. And other times he just makes some boneheaded decisions, loses fights where he's up 2 rounds, all these kind of things that make it hard to trust him. But Morono's not a bad fighter. I just think he's in a little bit over his head athletically. Shout out to Jeremiah says, Vergara is extremely defensive. He isn't super confident, so he's hesitant, in my opinion. His talent isn't 100% exposed, but if he's not feeling himself, he's there until the ending bell rings. Yeah, I think that he's a tough guy, and he goes out there and fights to try and keep fights competitive. He's not going to blow people out of the water, but that's why I kind of lean towards him by decision if he's able to make it competitive. I think that if his opponent wins Temirov, he's going to look to get a spectacular finish. Londo says Morono is a sneaky dog this week. He's flying under the radar. I mean, God bless, man. Go wherever your heart desires, but he's given up some height. He's given up some reach. And D-Rod's last 3 losses are against Kelvin, Ian Gary, and let's go back one more before that. I think Neil Magny. And honestly, I would favor all 3 of those guys against Alex Morono. So that's just the way I see it, man. And I even thought that Neil Magny was being a little disrespected going into that D-Rod fight based on the grappling. I think Morono, his best chance to win this fight might be to try and stun D-Rod and submit him because Morono can like randomly land on people and he does throw with offbeat rhythm and timing. I think D-Rod's chin is getting a little worse. I think his cardio's gotten a little bit worse over time. But if you look back, that Neil Magny loss was not great. So that for me is the one thing that gives me pause. But I think those 2 fights in between, I don't really hold against him. The Ian Gary fight and the Kelvin fight where I thought you could make an argument for him and he went out there and fought pretty well. Twizzy says, I don't care who it is. I'm not betting Rodriguez minus 300. Oh, yeah, I mean, minus 300. God, no. Absolutely not. Has the line moved there? Let's go and look at our friends over at Fight Numbers. So the last fight we were looking at, plus 285 on CJ Vergara, the best available line on Bovada, minus 315 on BetOnline, the best available price on the favorite Temirov. And now let's take a look at, where is this fight? Must be up top. Here we go. Daniel Rodriguez, guys, best available money line. It's not minus 300. It's minus 205 here over at FanDuel Sportsbook. And we got a plus 181, the comeback on Morono. The fight is also favored to go the distance. Minus 172 to the over, plus 165 at Caesars Sportsbook to the under. So we've got a lot of great opportunities. If you guys ever want to get access to these numbers, to these lines, to all the tools that they have on the website over at Fight Numbers, use my promo code Liam. They will hook you up with a discount when you're signing up. So shout out to those guys. We appreciate them for the support. And next up on the slate, guys, let's go ahead and take a look at Grant Dawson against Tafa Garcia. This one's going down at 155 pounds. And I have typically not been a Grant Dawson guy throughout the course of his career. I've been skeptical of his cardio and his chin. I then, didn't bet Bobby Green, which is a huge regret of mine. But if you look at Grant Dawson, what he does well is he can take people's back. He's excellent at holding people down and controlling them. His finishing needs a little bit of work, but even still, he's quite dangerous on the back. Finishing Jared Gordon and pacing him in the 3rd round was pretty impressive to me. But if you look at Grant Dawson, I don't trust him on the feet. I don't trust his striking. And I think that against Tafa Garcia, it's a little bit of a weird fight. When you look at Tafa, he's smaller. He does look to me like he's got crazy HGH gut. I don't think his wrestling is as good or as effective as Grant Dawson, but he's got a body type where he's kind of low to the ground. If you look at his posture, he's got this big, weird chest. And so I think there's a chance that Grant Dawson can just dominate him from on top. But I also have my suspicions that if Dawson is not able to finish him, that Tafa may come out better from some of those exchanges than Grant. But it's a tricky one for me. So the way that I talked about this fight was there hasn't been a draw in a very long time in the UFC. I don't think there's been one so far this year. And Grant Dawson has been to a draw before. I bet the underdog the last time that Grant Dawson went to a draw, and it was Ricky Glenn. And if you guys remember that fight, Ricky Glenn is not some prolific finisher. He's not known as being like a 3rd round guy. And he outlasted Grant Dawson. Grant Dawson got very fatigued. And then Ricky Glenn almost put him away from the top position. When you look at the last fight that Grant Dawson had, he was able to take down and dominate Joe Solecki, who is a good, a good submission grappler. But I don't think that Joe Solecki is very assertive in the cage at all. If you look back at his fights, there's often times where he's willing to pull guard and kind of concede being on the bottom because he just wants to be comfortable grappling. And I do think that Rafa Garcia is a guy that tries to spend a lot of energy, keep getting back up, keep rotating, keep trying to move. And so I think it could either lead to him getting submitted, right? I do think that's a live possibility. I think Grant Dawson, his reason for accepting this fight is that he wants to try and finish this guy. That's the people have been saying, why did he not take a step up in competition? He just won his last fight. He got back on the mend. Why did he not take a step up? He's trying to stay in the lower end of the division right now, get finishes, get something that people will remember positively on his resume, then move up in the division, right? Because lightweight's crowded. It's hard to make a name. It's hard to make an impression. And frankly, Grant Dawson just ain't the most marketable guy on the planet, right? He doesn't say that much that's interesting. He doesn't go out there and blow your hair back. He's going to go out there and take people's back and hold them down. So is he talented? Absolutely. Is he a guy that you could bank on for entertainment value? Not necessarily, right? See the Demirov Magulov fight. So the KO number is big, according to my guy Lando, at 10-1, and I see where he's coming from there. I definitely understand where you're coming from, but I think that the number, on the sub is also big, right? At like plus 420, and I think it's more likely. I think Rafa Garcia is a very tough guy. I think you could TKO him, but I think he will keep trying to work back up to his feet. I don't think he will quit on himself and just cover up. So I think more often than not, he's really going to try and explode and get back up and make these movements. And I think it's ultimately going to either create that submission opportunity for Grant Dawson, or it might be the kind of style that makes Dawson spend a lot of energy trying to mat return him, trying to get him back down, trying to control him. And if he does that, I think that it's live for Garcia to, make it a fight in round 3. And like I said, we saw Ricky Glenn go out there and get a 10-8 round against this guy just by hanging around and not fucking off. I don't think he did anything more sophisticated than that. So for me, Rafa Garcia's got the ability to not fuck off. But I think that you have Grant Dawson ITD props as the way to play him, right? Some way to get on his finishing looks. And I think the alternate is looking at, a really contrarian angle, a Rafa Garcia money line, a Rafa Garcia by draw, like these kind of things. That's kind of the way I see this one. So for me, long shots, no doubt about it. But at 80-1, you don't have to be right very often to pay yourself off on those. And that's the kind of price that you're looking at for a draw. So with none in the UFC so far this year, I think this is at least a candidate, right? And I think you can make a colorable case. Shout out to Haunter, says Rafa decision. I mean, I can't rule it out. Also, I will just note, because you guys have been so loyal and shouting out, almost 2 a.m. here for you guys, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share the A-side underdogs this week. And what I can't do is tell you that they're going to win, right? I have no idea. But what I can do is just tell you, these are the fighters that have a bigger social media profile than their opponents. And you can see with Lucas Rocha, it's only plus 4,000 or so, right? 8.5 compared to 4.7. For Dan Argueta, it's a huge 4x of the social media following of Haddon, right? 7.2K compared to 43K. Cory McKenna more than doubles up Julia Polastri. And then you look up here, Rafa Garcia, the only main card A-side underdog. And he's going against a Grant Dawson who, 30.6 thousand, and he's headlined UFC events before. I mean, that's not making the most of your opportunities, right? So for Rafa Garcia, he's got a lot to gain, and he's on a 2-fight win streak. I think that when you look at this fight, Grant Dawson is going to go out there and try and finish, which means he might, instead of optimizing for the win, optimize for the finish, meaning I'm going to spend everything in round 1 and 2, and if you don't get him out of there, you could be a shell of yourself in round 3. So those are the ways that I think you look at this fight. You look at a live entry on Rafa Garcia. If you see Grant Dawson start to slow down, maybe you pre-bet some Dawson finish props or you pre-bet the draw. So those are the ways I'm looking at this one, guys. And shout out to all of you for the support. If you want full access to those documents and everything else that we talk about on the show, you could go ahead and find all that down below by becoming a channel member, by joining the Patreon. Any way you want to support, we appreciate the love and support. And we appreciate everybody who's rocking with us. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit like on the video. Make sure you drop that little love and support for us. And we will continue on to the next fight, guys. We've got Chidi and Njokuani against Jared Gooden. And I'll tell you the truth. this is another fight that, it seemed so clear to me until I did more research, and then it became much more difficult for me. I thought to myself, like, Chidi and Njokuani, you cannot trust this guy. He's got cigarette cardio. His ground game is suspect. But if you go back and watch, guys, Jared Gooden, I bet the ends KO in his last fight, and I think it was a great bet that didn't cash. If you go back and look, Jared Gooden beat the absolute tar out of Wellington Turman on the ground and then ended up choking him out. But if you watch that fight back, guys, Wellington Turman nearly knocked out Jared Gooden several times. That's not great, right? Like, Wellington Turman is definitely making improvements, but he's just a mid-tier guy with a poor chin, and that for me was not a great look for Jared Gooden. Here's the other thing for me about Jared Gooden that is not a bullish signal. Jared Gooden, 23-9 as a professional, right? 2-4 in the UFC. But he has now missed weight against Chidi and Njokuani. He missed weight against Carlston Harris. He missed weight against Randy Rude Boy Brown. And can I give you guys something? He missed weight against Randy Rude Boy Brown. He lost the fight via unanimous decision. He missed weight against Carlston Harris. He lost the fight again via unanimous decision. So now, can he make it 3 in a row where he goes out there, misses weight, and then loses a unanimous decision, right? This guy, Jared Gooden, he's kind of like fumbling his opportunity, man. Like, this is the spot where he should have had a good opportunity to go out there and say, hey, I'm a real welterweight. This is my weight class. You're coming down here trying to take what's mine, and I'm holding serve. And he didn't do that. He misses the weight against a guy who's clearly visibly bigger than him, right? Like, it's one thing if you miss weight and the other guy is the same size. Chidi is bigger. He had to cut probably just as hard or harder, and he made the weight. And that, frankly, I just have to say, shout out to Chidi for being a professional, and demerit to Jared Gooden, the Night Train, for just not being a professional about this. Like, I don't mean to shit on a guy when he's down, but it was many years ago that he missed weight against Randy Brown, and he's had all this time and all this opportunity, and he missed weight again. And it's just not a great look for me. It's an indictment, frankly. So I think that I'm looking at a guy in Jared Gooden who's got a path to victory, right? He's tough. He's willing. He'll stand in the pocket, take damage, and throw back. His face got battered in his last fight, and he still found a way to win. But you're missing weight, you're refusing handshakes, and you're fighting a guy who can kick you in the head from this far away in an instant, and you fight with your hands down at your nipples, right? You got your hands at shoulder height against this guy, against Chidi, who can hit you from too far away, who can hit you in the nose. I don't like this fight for Jared Gooden because I saw too much that was exploitable by Wellington Turman, who was cooking him with the calf kicks, who was landing easily with the left hook every time he wanted to upstairs. But here's the thing. I think we've seen Chidi at middleweight self-immolate a few times, meaning he comes out there, he gets super aggressive, he gets right in the guy's face, and then if the guy really resists and comes back and starts throwing back, he doesn't like the ruckus anymore, right? He likes to beat the shit out of people and get the respect. He does not like when it's a really scary fight, and he has broken many times in those circumstances. So for me, if this fight ends in the first 8 minutes, or if it goes to decision, I kind of favor Chidi to get the win here. I think he'll do a little bit more from distance. I think he'll probably land the bigger shots and have better defense in this fight in the early going. But the one thing I will note about Chidi is I do not rate his cardio, and I do think Jared Gooden picks up the pace when guys put down the pack. So if you start to get tired against Jared Gooden, he will try and pick it up for you, and he will try and put you out of there. And he doesn't care. He will not discriminate. He'll follow you to the ground and try and beat you up there. Wellington Turman was the one who tried to close down the clinch and grab a hold of him after he got hurt, and Jared Gooden sent him flying through the air and took him down, got on top, used that brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to control position and force Wellington Turman to submit. First guy to ever force him to do that. So I think Gooden is live late. I think Chidi is the favorite, deservedly so, early, because Jared Gooden just has bad fundamental striking defense, right? It's not high enough level, and he doesn't take it seriously enough that a guy like Chidi could absolutely hurt him and knock him out. And I think that that's what I'm very worried for here, for Jared Gooden. I think the Night Train is live. I was at Jiu-Jitsu today at a seminar, at a training session. I heard Night Train come on the songs. I was like, yo, is this a sign? Should I be betting Jared Gooden? And then I watched more tape, and I was like, I got to keep my hands clean in this one. So the under is at plus money. which I think is kind of interesting on the under 1.5 here. I do think that Chidi money line is very correlated with the under. Again, he could win a decision. We just saw that against Reese McKee, but I'm telling you, I've seen a lot of bad visuals from Jared Gooden in terms of the chin metrics. I don't think he's ever been knocked down in the UFC, but he gets put on ice skates and like sent looking off in the distance, time traveling in most of his fights. And Chidi, when the going gets tough, he tends to get going ultimately. So for me, I think both guys have a path to finish. And I think Chidi is going to go out there and be the live guy in round 1. I think as the fight gets extended, I prefer Jared Gooden to take over a little bit late. But it's a hell of a fight, man. It's good matchmaking. I don't like this one for Jared the more I look at it, because his hand positioning is just not defensively responsible. He's going to get hit in the head really hard, I think. Nice. Okay. Good stuff from the chat. You guys are making friends in the chat, commenting in the chat, sorting out bets in the chat. So I appreciate each and every one of you guys. Sharpest chat in the game. Come be a part of it. Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comment section and we will read them live on the air. But guys, let's move along here to the co-main event of the evening as we check out what the prices are, for the next fight. So we've got Brad Tavares taking on Jun Young Park in the co-main event of the evening. And Jun Young Park, guys, has a very solid record in the UFC. If you look back, this guy has put up a very, very reasonable career. 7-3 in the UFC, and the losses that he's had. Andre Muniz via split decision. A lot of people thought that he deserved to get the win. He was stunned that he lost that fight on the night. He gave up many takedowns, but he was able to rally late in the fight. If you look at the Gregory Rodriguez fight, he had Gregory Rodriguez on ice skates. He looked like he was about to get him out of there. And then RoboCop just fires back down the middle, hits him with a kill shot, and he never went down, guys. But he got put out against the cage, and unfortunately for him, that cost him the fight. I had bet RoboCop that night. It was a sweat and a half. One of the awesome comeback bets that I've ever cashed. But if you look at that, guys, Jun Young Park, tough son of a gun. Then he lost his UFC debut, got anaconda choked by Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. Anthony Fluffy Hernandez is now 6-2 in the UFC. So he lost to 6-2 in the UFC, Fluffy Hernandez. He lost to Gregory Rodriguez, who is now 7-2 in the UFC. And he lost to Andre Muniz, who does not have as shiny a record as those guys. But Andre Muniz is 6-2 in the UFC. I stand corrected. So he's literally lost to Savage, and Savage, right? Like great fighter, great record. And if you look at the Brad Tavares side, I really respect Brad Tavares. He is a absolute veteran of the game. And I always use him as the example of, if you want to know how stupid this sport can be sometimes, Brad Tavares got punted in the face one time by, Edmund Shabazian, and the fight was over shortly thereafter, right? Edmund, since then, has never won a meaningful fight at 185 pounds. Not one. If you look back, right, our guy Duplessis, the current champion of the UFC, went against Brad Tavares, could not finish him. I had Duplessis huge at plus 108, and then I had the fight not to go the distance at plus 108 or something like that, and it didn't cash. I could not believe my eyes. And if you look at that fight, Brad Tavares shows why he's so good. He D's up takedowns like a gangster, and if you go out there and try and take him down, you will get exhausted. You will fall all over the place. You will struggle to take him down. He does something really smart, which is when you go to a single leg, he punches you right in the face. You've got both hands occupied. You can't defend yourself, so he punches you really hard, and then when you go to bring both hands up, he brings his leg down. So he makes it very simple. These little tools of MMA, they're not like a takedown defense that you use in high school wrestling or something like this, right? It is all MMA veteran craft. That's what makes Brad Tavares good. But if you're not going to bring a pressure-heavy wrestling game plan, you could definitely beat Brad Tavares, right? If you look at Brad Tavares, he's a very meat-and-potatoes kickboxer. He hardly ever knocks somebody down. He's been knocked down several times in the UFC as well. So you look at his career, and he's a solid enough guy, but he's just a hanger-on at this point, right? He's a guy who's been around for a long time. He's in the local scene. He's willing to fight anybody. He can win the fight. But I don't think of Brad Tavares as a guy who's very naturally aggressive. I don't think he wants to hurt anybody. I don't think he's out there looking to put people away. I think he's kind of just point fighting and sliding through his career. Like, I don't know that he really cares and is super highly motivated to win these contests. And here's the concern on the Jin Young Park side. He pulled out of this fight. It was booked in June. They were supposed to fight. He was not medically cleared by the doctor after weighing in. He weighed in for this fight. They did the face-off, and you guys can go back and look for yourself. See if you feel weird about it too. He was kind of just like grabbing his stomach in a weird way, like after they weighed in. And maybe it's nothing, but for me, I always want every single box to be checked. I want it to be all like systems go if I'm on a favorite. And in this fight, I just don't really feel that with Jin Young Park. Like, he could definitely win this fight, and he should win this fight. I think he should be favored. But at 65%, his takedowns aren't going to be there this time. And I could tell you, against Eric Anders, a guy who was big, physical, meat and potatoes striker, who threw at a pretty low volume, it was a split decision. I had a huge bet on Park, and I was sweating. We'll just put it that way. I thought I could have easily lost that bet, and it would have been a huge swing the other direction. So Jin Young Park at big chalk prices, I was out from that point forward. He's gone out there and covered since against Albert Duraev, but we've also seen he can go to close fights with Muniz. He can get outworked to a submission by Fluffy Hernandez, and he can get knocked out on the feet by Gregory Rodriguez. So he's got all the skills and abilities to win this fight. I think his boxing is a little bit more high volume. I think his record has been a little bit more impressive recently. But in terms of the level of competition and all those factors, it kind of evens out to me to say, hey, I think Park should be favored. I think he's going to win this fight, but I don't need to chase a money line here. I think more often than not, he wins a decision. It's favored minus 245 to go over. If you look back, this guy, shout out to Glenn. That's very interesting. He says, hot take alert, Brad, round 2 sub. First performance of the night bonus in the UFC. Ramon Delidze was one of his main training partners for this fight. That's an interesting note. Brad last sub win was against Court McGee. Man, that a blast from the past right there. Brad really doesn't attempt much wrestling or grappling. I guess Park could wrestle himself into a hole theoretically. So I could see some merit to that. I don't know that he attempts subs at all. Let's go back and look at UFC stats, guys. Always the gold standard. Let's see if UFC stats has any submission attempts for Brad Tavares. Zero submission attempts for Brad Tavares per 15 minutes. Let's see here. Brad Tavares. Man. Let's see here. I'm scrolling through. I'm not seeing a single submission attempt in the UFC over a massive sample size for Brad Tavares. So it could happen. He's had 24 pro fights in the UFC. I mean, it definitely could happen, but he subbed him on Tough. There it is. Yeah, so 0 attempts in his entire UFC career, but he did cash it on Tough. Hey, I always love a narrative nation bet, brother. I will never push back there. So interesting spot, weird fight for the co-main event, but I think Jin Young Park has been trending in the right direction. I think Tavares trending in the wrong direction, and that's just the way I see it. So ultimately, give me Jin Young Park, but I think it's not a price I want to be chasing, especially given the health concerns that we know about for Jin Young Park and his pullout from the last fight in June. Okay, guys. The moment you've all been waiting for. We got 413 people rocking with us live. 300 people over on X. I hope that you guys will do me a solid. Go ahead and retweet this. We're about to do the main event analysis. Let a friend know. Tell somebody. We're about to talk about Tatsuro Taira and Brandon Royval. And I can tell you guys, I've been profitable on both of these fighters. I bet Brandon Royval at a plus 190. I want to say it was a plus 190 price tag against Kaikar of France. I have my write-up from that fight from back in the day. I called him by submission. I thought it would be in round 2, and that's exactly what we saw play out, right? Brandon Royval has been an underrated guy in the past because he came into the UFC with a bunch of losses on his regional record, and the guy, has a very loosey-goosey style, right? He lets people in on his takedowns. He gave up a bunch of takedowns against Tim Elliott before he paced him there and was able to defeat him. So I think that when you look at a guy who's as talented as Brandon Royval, you have to say, he's a guy that deserves credit and respect, right? He went out there and got a win, very close win, very controversial win at the time against Brandon Moreno, but he got the job done, and it was close, but he got it done. And I think that was a really impressive feather in his cap. But I also think you have to look at the context of everything. Timing is everything in mixed martial arts. And Royval fought Moreno when Moreno was in his prime, and Moreno kind of gave him the business, right? And then I believe, and I could be proven wrong, when he goes out and takes on Amir Albazi, But I think that Brandon Moreno is past his prime, honestly. I think that he had a lot of serious, hard 5-round fights scheduled with Figgy. I think it took a lot out of him. I think he had a lot of other interests and pursuits outside of fighting. He got cut from the UFC, had to earn his way back. I think the motivation bar might have just been a little low for Brandon Moreno, and it was all the way up for Brandon Royval. Royval used to be training at Factory X. Now he's no longer training there. And I do think that's always a interesting question, right? How are you going to look outside of your normal training camp? And Alexander Hernandez, it's one thing to go out there and take on a guy who's not super sophisticated in Austin Thud Hubbard and get the win. Royval was cornering him there, right? So Royval, how invested is he in his fight camp? He's all over the place. He's going here, there, and everywhere, cornering these guys and running his own gym now. He's got a lot of other pursuits. So for me, I don't love that, right? I like when guys are selfish, when it's all about them, when they've got a great camp, when everything's built for them and around them. I think that tends to work out well for these guys when they have less distractions, less bullshit. I think Alex Morono has, had some suboptimal performances in the UFC, in part because he's coaching and he's doing all these other things, and he's not focused 100% on the goal, on the task at hand, which is his own fight. It's a very selfish endeavor to be a high-level athlete at this level. And I think that for Royval, it's the opposite to be a coach, right? It's a very selfless, it's a very giving approach. And I think that for Tatsuro Taira, he's put in now several camps at high-altitude MMA, high-altitude martial arts, HAMA. If you look at his training partners for this camp, he's working very closely with Chepe Mariscal as well as several talented Japanese fighters. And what does Chepe bring to the table? He's got very good judo. He's got good hips. He's got an ability to work in all positions. He's very high volume in terms of his striking. He's willing to go out there and put up a high output. And he's been doing a great job in the UFC. And so you see he comes conditioned. He comes willing to throw all night. And he comes ready for any phase of the fight. And I think Tatsuro Taira is a great fit in terms of, talking about a guy like Chepe. He's very similar in that regard. He can fight you anywhere. I think on the feet, Tatsuro Taira for a long time didn't get any respect. I think now people are starting to give him a little bit more respect, but they still have doubts. They still have questions about him. For me, I interpret Tatsuro Taira as the following. I think he's got power in his hands. I think he's got power in his kicks. I think he's got excellent submission abilities. I think his ground game is sensational. When you look at what he does on the ground, it's not just the submissions. It's not just the ability to control positions. It's the ability to pop out on your back from the full closed guard. Things that most people can't do, he's athletically capable of doing. Things that are unusual, things that are creative. You see him, control limbs and then attempt submissions that are not problems. They're dilemmas, right? Triangle arm bars. He puts you in a situation where if you want to defend the triangle, no problem. I'm going to go belly down and I'm going to snap your arm in half. And that's a very difficult proposition. It doesn't matter how tough you are, right? I always say there's two things you can't tough guy, a choke or something snapping, right? Like if I break something of yours, it's like you can't really be a tough guy about that. You look back at Andre Muniz and Jacare Souza. What happened there? Jacare's got great jiu-jitsu. He's got a great willpower to win. He's not going to give up and say, hey, you got me. I tap, uncle. He's not going to say any of that. But his arm got snapped in half, and that was the end of the fight. So I look at a guy like Tatsuro Taira as having devastating submissions, an ability to fight from all phases, meaning on the feet, I think he's dangerous. On the ground, I think his ground and pound is sickening, right? He's gone out there and gotten unanimous 10-8 rounds before against Edgar Chairez, a guy that I respect in the division. He's gone out there and got a 10-8 round on Derek Cleary's scorecard, against Carlos Candelario. And again, I agree with that card. I would have given him a 10-8 round. He was on top. He was landing huge damage. He was beating him up with elbows, battering him. And if you look, some of those fights, guys, he looked fresh as a daisy to me going into the third round and at the end of the third round, but he didn't have 4 and 5 to work with. I think that you look at a guy like Tatsuro Taira, I think if he has more time to work, he would have finished both of the guys that have gone the distance with him in the UFC. That's a personal opinion, but I truly feel that way. And when you look at his style and approach, I think that controlling people from behind is the most dominant position in mixed martial arts. So when he's able to get there, he can open up with his ground and pound. He can use it to transition to the mount. And I think that Brandon Royval has been shown to have he's too willing to show his back, right? To just put it simply, he shows his back against Pantoja, and it got him submitted once. It got him a losing decision the next time. When you look at what Tatsuro Taira, needs to avoid in this fight, I think that's something that we always got to talk about. What could go wrong? because anything could go wrong. It's a fight. I think that the biggest things he needs to avoid in this fight are the guillotine of Brandon Royval, which is very sound. He's very talented with that maneuver. He's very comfortable. He pulls himself into it. So I called him by guillotine against Kai Kara-France. But why? Because Kai Kara-France had a habit that he's since gotten a little bit better at correcting. But if you look back at his old footage, he used to have this habit of landing big shots. Somebody might hurt him, and then he would shoot in for a takedown, right? Brad Riddell used to do the same exact thing. And that is why I used to bet on those guys to get club and subbed. Because if you shoot takedowns while you're hurt and you don't have a good ground game to begin with, guys are going to wrap up your neck and it's going to be all over before you even know what time it is. For Kai Kara-France, against Brandon Royval, he was able to defend, I believe, the first guillotine, and it was the second guillotine that was money, right? You look at Royval, he commits to his guillotines. He's got a lot of squeeze on those, and he was able to tap Schnell with the two-hand jam, right? But if you also look back, Matt Schnell has recorded 1 knockdown in 14 UFC fights. It was against Brandon Royval. So you see, this guy, he's wild, he's reckless, and it has good and bad results, right? Like sometimes it works out in his favor, other times it doesn't. Against Kai Kara-France, he's lucky that Kai Kara-France crowded his work. Kai Kara-France hurt him so badly with a big punch, and then instead of picking his shots, he tried to chase him in. He tried to come in super aggressive, and Royval hit a knee, came up, spun with an elbow, and changed the complexion of the fight entirely. That was where chaos worked to his advantage. I think that when you have somebody who's an excellent control style grappler, chaos can be to your own detriment, right? It can put you in these worse positions that can be harder to recover from. And I think that Tatsuro Taira, he gets criticized for the Edgar Chairez performance. He got hurt in that fight at one point. He got clipped with a left hook on the feet. I think he responded very well. I think he reacted perfectly, right? He got hit with a shot. And so he circles up and comes up to a single leg. And Chairez tries to pull guillotine. And what happens? Easily, Taira passes the guard. He's done that to most of his UFC opponents. A lot of guys try to guillotine Taira because he puts his head inside. And then he passes their guard and he uses it as a tool of passing. I think in this fight, he should not bait the guillotine because you just don't want to put your head in a compromised situation against Royval if you can avoid it. I think that for Taira, he's very good at getting takedowns from the back. We saw that against Alex Perez. People don't want to give it credit because it was a gross injury. And I agree, it's unfortunate. But it's also a fighting technique. He's on his back and he tried to kick out the post leg. Your options then are to either go to the ground, which is what Perez did not want to do, right? Perez wanted to stay upright on the feet. Or you put a lot of pressure on your knee. And that was what happened. He put a lot of pressure on his knee, and Taira was able to exploit his knee. When you look at Royval, he's constantly showing his back. Could we see Taira end up in the same situations, trying to return him from the feet to the ground? I think we could. Could we see Taira in dominant positions on the ground, rolling wrists, going for ground and pound from the top? I think that we could. Pantoja, guys, is a lot more comfortable controlling from the back and being very stationary there. He likes to hold on. He likes to look for his submissions, but he's very jiu-jitsu oriented. I think that Tatsuro Taira has a grappling heavy style, but I think he's assertive and effective with his ground and pound. I think it's something that people have to reckon with. The last thing I'll note here is that you look at the Carlos Hernandez fight. Carlos Hernandez is very experienced. He's had a lot of amateur fights, and he's had a lot of professional fights now. And when you look, he's had 28 pro and amateur fights. He's been stopped with strikes one time in 28 pro and amateur fights, and it was against Tatsuro Taira. You see this guy that a lot of people look at and they don't think of as a striker. He landed a powerful shot on the feet and put this guy on ice skates, caved in his eye, right? And then followed him to the ground and beat him up with the ground and pound. So we've seen him go to decision twice. We've seen him go to submissions twice against Jesus Aguilar, a talented grappler, against CJ Vergara, a guy who most guys have not been able to put away in the UFC. He was able to put him away. Then you look at, okay, what about the KO, the TKO? He got an injury last time out against Alex Perez, a tough guy, a guy who's a very quality wrestler, by the way, a much better wrestler in my view than Brandon Royval. I think Royval, interesting grappler, creative, dynamic. I think that his wrestling is putrid. It's very bad. He gives up takedowns too easily at the UFC level. And so for all those things considered, I think that, it's an honest fight, so to speak. I think that Royval deserves these opportunities. He's earned his right to be amongst the top of the division. But I've been saying since Tatsuro Taira got to the UFC that I thought he was a future world champion, that I thought he was going to be fast-tracked to success, and that's exactly what I think is happening here. I said a long time ago, I tweeted this out, there are guys in the top 5 who couldn't last 15 minutes with Tatsuro Taira. And then we saw last time out against Alex Perez, the fight ended in the second clip. I know Alex Perez won the first round, and my hat's off to him for that. But it's a 5-round fight, and I think Tatsuro Taira has proven himself to be very dangerous, to be very capable of finishing fights over the course of his career, from the club and subs on the regional scene to the finishes with clean grappling technique in the UFC to the finishes on the feet of a guy who's never been stopped with strikes before. I think this guy so far has come up aces each and every time that I've seen him pressed. And what I love about this guy is you could throw a wrench in it, right? He was supposed to fight this guy. He misses weight. He's supposed to fight that guy. You know, he doesn't want to be there. We got to reschedule in a week, 2 weeks. We'll see you then. All these different shenanigans have happened during Taira fights. Guys don't want to show up. Guys don't want to make weight. Guys want to cancel the week of the fight. And he's always said yes. And so you saw that performance against Edgar Chairez. That's actual adversity. That's saying yes to a hard fight on short notice, taking the fight, and finding a way to win it. And by the way, at that time, he was like minus 700. And I said, like, guys, this is not the time to bet Taira. I was like, it's a very high price. And I think about a fight like this. And DG says, Taira ain't knocking out or beating Royval by TKO on the ground. I disagree. I totally disagree. And people said that to me the last 2 times that he fought, and I'll just be honest with you. I made $850+ betting the opinion that Tatsuro Taira can win fights by striking, right? Whether it's with ground and pound or whether it's with his hands on the feet. So yeah, he's an opportunistic grappler, no doubt about it. But he's also a violent guy, and I don't think he gets credit for that, right? He goes out there and he puts guys away, he hurts them, he batters them, he makes them quit. And people just want to talk about the finesse and the grappling, but I don't think it's just that. I think he's hurting these guys. I think he's putting them away because he's breaking them down and beating them up over time. And I think of a guy like Royval as a very tough guy, right? He's not easy to submit. We saw Pantoja all over him in the back. And if you just offer him those threats, just the submission threats, he will go hand fight all night from negative positions. But I think that if you go out there, you roll some wrists, you put some elbows on this guy, either it starts to open up your submission opportunities, or he's going to make worse decisions and give up worse positions, and that's how you get finished. So for me, I do think Taira is capable of finishing on the ground, but I respectfully disagree with you. So if you, if you're right, God bless, you can come back, say, hey, Liam, you got it wrong there, but I'm just going to continue to ride the belief that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And for me, I've had a good read on both these guys throughout their career, and I like the Tatsuro Taira side from announcement till today. So I think he's going to win the fight. I think it's going to be competitive early. I think that Tatsuro Taira has the cleaner game with more ways to win over time, and I think that's going to be shown out. But it's going to be a hell of a fight and a hell of a proving ground. So let's see if Tatsuro Taira can get us more burgers. He's gotten us a lot of burgers so far, and Lord willing, he's got one more in the chamber. So guys, if you want more from me, I've got more information that I'll be working on tonight, posting prelim write-ups. I've already got main card write-ups. I've already got a couple bets in on this card, so I'm excited about it, and I'm going to have more things going on basically as the night goes on. So I'm going to be looking at the market. I'm going to be sharing all my thoughts with patrons, with channel members. If you guys want to show love and support, those are 2 great ways to do it. All the information that you need is in the description box down below. God bless you all. Good luck on all your bets. Come back next time. We're having all the same fun again. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.